Before we begin tonight's story, I want to take just a moment to connect with all of you listening right now. If you're enjoying this content and find yourself coming back night after night, using your hype points on this video helps the channel more than you could possibly know. It truly makes a difference in allowing us to continue creating these stories for you. And if you're listening on Spotify, leaving a review is something that helps us reach more people who love this kind of content as much as you do. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. If you feel like sharing, let us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you're listening from. We absolutely love seeing where everyone is tuning in from, whether you're winding down for the night or just starting your day on the other side of the world. And of course, if you enjoy what we do here, subscribing means you'll never miss a story. Now let's talk about something that happened on a road that shouldn't have had anything unusual about it at all. The frequency that followed us. This is not a story about something I saw. This is about something I heard and then couldn't stop hearing. I need to be clear about something from the start. I have never been the type of person who believes in aliens. I have never scanned the night sky looking for answers. I have never attended a conference, read conspiracy forums, or entertained the idea that we are being watched. My worldview was practical, grounded, skeptical by nature. I lived in a universe explained by science, probability, and common sense. But on a night in late October, something happened that I still cannot explain. Not with science, not with logic, not with anything I was taught to trust. It started with a sound, and once you hear it, you never really stop listening. The human ear can detect frequencies ranging from 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz. Below that threshold exists infrasound, vibrations too low for conscious perception but still felt by the body. Infrasound can cause disorientation, anxiety, feelings of unease. It is produced by natural phenomena, earthquakes, ocean waves, wind passing over mountains. It is also produced by man-made sources, industrial machinery, aircraft, weapons testing. But what I heard that night was none of these things. It was something else entirely, and it changed everything I thought I understood about the world. Chapter 1. The Trip. It was supposed to be a simple drive. 4 of us were travelling through the western stretch of Nevada, cutting through a region so remote that even GPS seemed hesitant to function. We were returning from a weekend hiking trip. Nothing unusual, nothing planned beyond getting back to the main highway before midnight. The terrain was flat and featureless, broken only by distant ridges that melted into shadow as the sun disappeared behind them. I was in the passenger seat. My friend Marcus was driving. In the back were his girlfriend Linda and her brother Kevin. The conversation was casual. Complaints about sore legs, jokes about the lack of cell service, speculation about where we might stop for food. The radio played low, some classic rock station fading in and out as we moved between invisible signal zones. The road stretched endlessly ahead, illuminated only by our headlights. There were no other cars, no buildings, no lights on the horizon, just emptiness in every direction. Nevada has always been a place of secrets. The federal government owns more than 80% of the land in the state, much of it restricted, monitored, or classified. The Nevada test site conducted nearly 1,000 nuclear detonations between 1951 and 1992. Groom Lake, known colloquially as Area 51, sits 100 miles northeast of Las Vegas, surrounded by restricted airspace and armed security. The Tonopah Test Range, the Nevada National Security Site, dozens of installations whose operations remain classified to this day. We were nowhere near any of these locations, or so we thought. The region we were driving through was listed on maps as public land, Bureau of Land Management Territory, open to hiking, camping and transit. There were no signs indicating otherwise, no fences, no warnings, just empty desert stretching in all directions. But someone, somewhere, was using this land for something. We just didn't know it yet. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, oppressive in a way you don't notice until someone points it out. But no one did. We were comfortable, tired, ready to get home. That comfort lasted another 17 minutes. Marcus had his window cracked slightly, letting in the cold desert air. The temperature had dropped rapidly after sunset, as it always does in the high desert. Linda was half asleep in the back seat, her head resting against Kevin's shoulder. Kevin scrolled through his phone, searching futilely for a signal that didn't exist. I stared out the windshield, watching the road vanish into darkness beyond the reach of our headlights. There was something hypnotic about it. The sameness, the repetition, the absence of variation, mile after mile of nothing. And then, without warning, everything changed. Chapter 2. The Interference. The first sign was the radio. It had been crackling intermittently for the last few miles, which wasn't unusual given the terrain. But this was different. The static didn't behave like static. It pulsed, a rhythmic interference that rose and fell in slow, deliberate waves, almost like breathing. Marcus reached forward and adjusted the dial, cycling through stations. Every frequency carried the same distortion. He frowned but said nothing. Linda leaned forward between the seats. Is that the radio or the speakers? Don't know, Marcus muttered. He turned the volume down. The interference faded, but it didn't stop. I noticed it first because I wasn't distracted by driving. Even with the radio barely audible, the pattern was still there. A low hum beneath the music, steady, unnatural. Turn it off, I said. Marcus glanced at me but complied. He twisted the knob until the radio clicked off completely. The hum continued. We all heard it now. Faint but unmistakable. It wasn't coming from the speakers. It wasn't coming from the engine. It was coming from outside the vehicle. Or maybe it was inside, reverberating through the frame itself. I couldn't tell. Kevin leaned toward the window, pressing his ear against the glass. What the hell is that? No one answered. Marcus slowed the vehicle, but didn't stop. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel. We exchanged glances, confused, uneasy, but not yet afraid. There had to be an explanation. A transmission tower, a military facility, something we couldn't see but was operating nearby. But there was nothing out here. We all knew that. The hum grew slightly louder, not aggressive, not threatening, just present, persistent, like it had always been there, and we were only now tuning into it. I have since learned that the human brain has a remarkable ability to filter out constant background noise, air conditioning, traffic, the hum of electronics. These sounds exist around us constantly, but our consciousness learns to ignore them. They become part of the baseline, invisible, inaudible, unnoticed. But when a sound breaks through that filter, when it forces itself into conscious awareness despite the brain's best efforts to ignore it, that sound is usually significant. It usually means danger. Pull over, Linda said quietly. Marcus did. The vehicle rolled to a stop on the shoulder of the road. The engine idled. The headlights cast twin beams into the darkness ahead, illuminating nothing but empty asphalt and dirt. Marcus turned the key. The engine shut off. The hum remained. It was clearer now, more distinct. A low-frequency vibration that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. It didn't waver. It didn't fluctuate. It simply existed, constant and unchanging, filling the space around us with a presence that felt almost physical. Pull over, Linda said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus did. Chapter 3. The Sound. Outside. We sat in silence for a moment after the engine shut off. The hum was clearer now, no longer competing with the road noise or the engine. It filled the cabin like a pressure, felt more than heard. A low-frequency vibration that seemed to resonate in my chest, my teeth, the base of my skull. I opened the door and stepped out. The air was cold and still. No wind, no movement. The stars above were brilliant and sharp, unobscured by light pollution. The landscape around us was a study in absence, flat, dark, empty in every direction. And yet the hum was everywhere. It wasn't a single point source. It didn't come from the left or the right. It came from below, from above, from the air itself. It was omnipresent, as though the entire atmosphere had been tuned to a frequency just barely within human perception. The others got out slowly. Kevin walked a few paces from the vehicle, tilting his head as if trying to isolate the direction. Linda stayed close to the car, arms crossed tightly against her chest. Marcus stood beside me, his expression unreadable. "Do you feel that?" Linda whispered. I did. The ground beneath my feet wasn't shaking, not in any conventional sense, but there was a vibration, subtle, rhythmic, like standing on the hood of a car with the engine idling. Except there was no engine, no machinery, no explanation. I knelt down and placed my palm flat against the dirt. The vibration was stronger here, constant, pulsing up through the earth itself. Seismic activity was not uncommon in Nevada. The state sits on the edge of the Basin and Range Province, a region of active tectonic extension. Small earthquakes occur regularly, but earthquakes don't produce steady vibrations. They don't hum. This was something else. "We need to leave," Kevin said. His voice was tight, clipped. "Now!" Marcus nodded, already moving back toward the driver's side door. But I stayed where I was, because I had noticed something else. The air tasted different. It's difficult to describe. There was a faint metallic quality, like the air before a thunderstorm, but sharper, more acrid. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was wrong. Out of place. As though the atmosphere itself had been altered on a molecular level. I stood slowly, scanning the horizon. Nothing. No lights, no movement, just darkness and stars and the endless flat expanse of the desert. And then I saw something that made my stomach turn. The stars were wrong, not all of them. Just a section of the sky to the northeast. The stars there seemed dimmer, as though something was blocking them. Not a cloud, the night was perfectly clear. Not a mountain, we were on flat ground with clear sightlines in every direction. Something else was there. Something between us and the stars, something invisible. "Listen," I said. "To what?" Marcus asked. "Nothing. There's nothing." He paused, one hand on the door handle. His eyes scanned the darkness. Realization settled over his face. "Where are the bugs?" Chapter 4. Animals react. The insects had stopped. I don't know when it happened. At some point during our drive, the usual background noise of desert life had fallen away. No crickets, no distant coyotes, no rustling in the brush. The only sound was the hum and our breathing. The desert at night is never silent. There are always insects, always something moving, hunting, calling. But now there was nothing. The absence was so complete it felt deliberate, as though every living thing for miles had recognized something we hadn't and responded accordingly. Animals possess senses humans do not. They can detect changes in barometric pressure hours before a storm arrives. They can sense seismic activity, equal minutes before an earthquake strikes. Birds navigate using magnetic fields invisible to human perception. Dogs can hear frequencies far beyond human range. If the animals had gone silent, they had done so for a reason. Kevin was already back at the vehicle, yanking the rear door open. "We're leaving. Get in the car." Linda didn't argue, neither did Marcus. But I hesitated, still staring out into the dark. The hum pulsed again, slower now, deeper. I felt it in my ribs, in my lungs, like it was syncing with my heartbeat. For just a moment, I felt something else, a presence, not physical, not visible, but aware, focused, as though something vast and incomprehensible was turning its attention toward us. Or perhaps had been watching all along, and we were only now becoming conscious of it. The feeling passed as quickly as it came, but it left behind a residue, a knowledge I couldn't articulate, a certainty that we were not alone. "Hey!" Kevin's voice snapped me out of it. "Let's go!" I climbed back into the passenger seat. Marcus started the engine. The headlights flared to life, cutting through the blackness ahead. And that's when we saw the light. Chapter 5. The light without shape. It wasn't bright. It wasn't a beam or a disc or anything solid. It was a glow, diffuse and pale, hovering somewhere behind the low cloud cover to the northeast. At first, I thought it might be the moon breaking through, but the moon was behind us. This was something else. The light pulsed, not rapidly, slowly, a gentle brightening and dimming that matched the rhythm of the hum. Or maybe it was the other way around. It was impossible to tell which came first. Marcus didn't move. His hands were still on the wheel, but the engine idled. We all stared at the glow in silence. "What is that?" Linda breathed. No one answered. The light didn't move. It didn't descend or ascend. It simply existed, suspended in the atmosphere, reacting or responding to something we couldn't see. The hum shifted slightly in pitch and the light brightened in response. Then it faded again. I realized something then that made my skin crawl. The sound was not coming from the light. The light was reacting to the sound. Whatever was creating the hum was not visible. The glow was secondary, incidental, a byproduct of something else happening in the space above us, or below us, or around us. In 1952, the Central Intelligence Agency initiated Project Blue Book, an investigation into unidentified flying objects. Over the next 17 years, the project collected more than 12,000 reports. The vast majority were explained as weather phenomena, aircraft misidentification, or hoaxes. 700 cases remained unexplained. One pattern emerged in the unexplained cases. Many witnesses reported unusual sounds before visual contact. Low-frequency hums, high-pitched whines, distortions in ambient noise. The sound always preceded the sighting. Project Blue Book was officially closed in 1969. The government concluded that UFOs posed no threat to national security and warranted no further investigation. But the reports never stopped. They simply became harder to find. "Drive," I said. Marcus didn't argue. He slammed the vehicle into gear and we lurched forward, gravel spraying behind us. The headlights swept across the empty road ahead. The glow remained in the corner of my vision, unmoving, unchanging. The hum followed us. Chapter 6. The Physical Effect. We drove for 10 minutes without speaking. The hum never faded. It stayed with us, constant and unrelenting, pressing against the inside of the vehicle like an invisible hand. I could feel it in my chest now. Not painful, but wrong. A pressure that shouldn't exist. My balance felt off, as though the seat beneath me was tilting even though we were moving in a straight line. Linda made a small sound in the back seat. I glanced over my shoulder. Her face was pale, her eyes unfocused. "You okay?" She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was distant. "I feel like I'm not here." Kevin put a hand on her shoulder, but he looked just as disoriented. His jaw was clenched tight, his breathing shallow. "Something's wrong," he muttered. This isn't right." I turned back to the road, trying to focus, but my thoughts were slipping. Not in a panicked way, Not in a way that felt like fear. It was worse than that. It felt like my mind was being gently nudged aside, as though something else was testing the space where my thoughts should be. Intrusive, unfamiliar, not mine. I began to hear things that weren't there, words in a language I didn't recognize, numbers, sequences, data streams flowing through my consciousness like water through a sieve. I couldn't hold on to any of it. The information passed through me and was gone, leaving only the echo of its presence. Time felt wrong too. We'd been driving for 10 minutes, or an hour. Couldn't tell. The road looked the same. The darkness looked the same. The hum was the only constant, and it had become the centre of everything. Marcus gripped the wheel tighter. His knuckles were bloodless. "How far to the highway?" he asked. I checked the odometer. We should have covered more distance than this. We should have been farther. But the numbers didn't make sense. "I don't know," I said, and I didn't. There is a phenomenon known as temporal distortion. It occurs during traumatic events, when the brain's perception of time becomes unreliable. Witnesses to car accidents often report that everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Combat veterans describe moments of intense action stretching into hours. But this wasn't trauma. This wasn't adrenaline. This was something acting on us from the outside. Kevin suddenly leaned forward, his hand gripping the back of my seat. "Stop the car." "What?" Marcus didn't slow down. "Stop the car," Kevin repeated louder now. "I need to get out." "We're not stopping," Marcus said. "I need to get out." Kevin's voice cracked. He was pulling at the door handle, trying to open it while we were still moving. Linda grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Kevin, stop." "It wants me to get out," Kevin said, his voice hollow. "It's telling me to get out." A chill ran down my spine, not from fear, from recognition, because I had heard it too, not words, not a voice, but a suggestion. A gentle pressure at the edge of my thoughts, encouraging me to open the door, to step outside, to walk into the darkness. I had ignored it. Kevin hadn't. "It's in your head," I said, turning to face him. "Don't listen to it." Kevin stared at me, his eyes wide and glassy. "How do you know?" "Because I hear it too." Chapter 7. The silence returns. It stopped, not gradually, not with a fade or a shift. It simply ended. One moment the hum was there, pressing, vibrating, omnipresent. The next, it was gone. The silence that replaced it was so sudden, so complete that it felt like falling. Marcus slammed on the brakes. The vehicle skidded slightly before coming to a halt. We sat frozen, waiting for the hum to return. It didn't. The insects started again. Distant at first, then closer. A cricket chirped somewhere to our left. A bird called from the ridgeline. The world resumed as if nothing had happened. I looked up through the windshield. The glow was gone. The sky was clear. The stars were unchanged. No dimming, no obstruction. Whatever had been there was gone. Kevin exhaled slowly, his breath shaking. "What the hell was that?" No one answered. We sat in the silence for another minute, maybe longer. My heart was still racing. My hands were trembling, but the pressure in my chest was gone. The intrusive thoughts had stopped. I felt like myself again. Eventually, Marcus restarted the vehicle, and we continued driving. No one spoke. We reached the highway 20 minutes later, and didn't stop again until we were back in the city. When we finally parked, I checked the clock on my phone. We had been on that road for 43 minutes. It had felt like hours. I also noticed something else. My phone's GPS log showed a gap. For 17 minutes in the middle of our drive, my location data simply stopped. The tracking line ended, then resumed miles down the road. As though for those 17 minutes, I hadn't existed. Not to the satellites, not to the network, not to anything, watching from above. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. The first few days after were normal, or they should have been. I went back to work, returned to routine, tried not to think about what had happened on that road. Marcus and I talked once, briefly, uncomfortably, but neither of us could articulate what we had experienced. Kevin didn't want to discuss it at all. Linda stopped responding to messages, but the hum didn't stop. I heard it again 3 days later. I was lying in bed, the room dark and quiet, when I felt it. That same low vibration, faint but unmistakable. It lasted less than a minute before fading, but it was enough to pull me fully awake, my heart pounding. It happened again the next week, then twice the week after that. Always at night, always when I was alone. My electronics started behaving strangely. My phone would restart without reason. Lights flickered when I entered a room. My laptop froze repeatedly, the screen distorting with lines of static before recovering. I saw a physician. Hearing test, neurological exam, blood work, everything came back normal. The physician suggested stress, fatigue, possible tinnitus. I didn't mention the hum. It seemed pointless, but the sound persisted, quiet, occasional, never loud enough to disrupt my life, but always present enough to remind me it was still there. Listening. I began researching. Late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I would search for similar experiences. Most results were worthless conspiracy blogs, amateur UFO investigators, people claiming to channel extraterrestrial consciousness. But occasionally, I found something credible. A report from a geologist working in northern Alaska. He described a low-frequency hum that persisted for 6 hours near a remote research station. Equipment malfunctions, disorientation among the crew. The hum stopped as suddenly as it started, and no source was ever identified. A pilot in Australia reported unusual vibrations in her aircraft while flying over the outback. The instruments fluctuated wildly, the radio filled with interference. She changed altitude and course, but vibration followed her for 70 miles before disappearing. A researcher in Canada documented a phenomenon known as the hum, a persistent low-frequency sound reported by residents in dozens of locations worldwide. Taos, New Mexico, Windsor, Ontario, Bristol, England. The sound defied conventional explanation. Acoustic engineers could not identify a source. Government investigations found nothing, but the people heard it, and they couldn't stop hearing it. I started to wonder if what we experienced was part of something larger, something ongoing, something that had been happening for decades, perhaps longer, but remained invisible because no one wanted to acknowledge it, or because someone didn't want it acknowledged. Chapter 9. The pattern emerges. Years passed. The hum faded. I moved on. The memory became distant, abstract, something I could rationalize if I didn't think about it too hard. Life continued. Work, relationships, bills, the mundane architecture of existence. But then I saw the report. It was buried in a forum I had stumbled across by accident, a thread about unexplained audio phenomena. Someone had posted an account eerily similar to mine. A drive through rural Colorado, a hum that came from nowhere, a glow in the sky, physical disorientation, the loss of time. I read it 3 times. Then I found another and another. All rural locations, all remote, all involving sound first, visual second, if at all. The descriptions were consistent. Low frequency hum, pressure in the chest, intrusive thoughts, distorted perception of time. Some mentioned lights, others didn't. But the sound was always present. None of the reports had gone public. No news coverage, no investigations. Just scattered accounts from people who couldn't explain what had happened to them. I started collecting them, cross-referencing dates, locations, patterns. The encounters were rare but consistent. They clustered in certain regions: Nevada, New Mexico, northern Canada, Western Australia. always in areas with minimal light pollution and low population density. And always, the sound came first. I created a map, plotted every credible report I could find. The pattern was undeniable. The encounters formed a loose network across the globe, concentrated in remote areas, but following no obvious geographic logic. Some locations reported multiple incidents over years. Others had only one. But there was a consistency to the descriptions. The hum, the pressure, the feeling of being observed or scanned. The missing time, the electronic disturbances. These were not isolated incidents. They were data points in something larger. I reached out to some of the witnesses. Most didn't respond. A few did. Their stories matched mine almost exactly. One woman in Montana described the hum as intelligent. A man in Sweden said it felt like being tuned. Another witness in Chile said the frequency made him feel transparent. That word stuck with me. Transparent. As though the sound was passing through us, reading us, measuring us. I began to develop a theory. Chapter 10. The theory. I have spent years thinking about what happened that night. I have considered every rational explanation. Atmospheric phenomena, seismic activity, psychological suggestion, mass hallucination. None of them fit, because the hum was real, and if it was real, then something produced it. Here is what I believe. Whatever we encountered did not arrive visually. It did not land. It did not reveal itself in any conventional sense. It arrived as a frequency, a vibration that existed on a spectrum most of us never notice. The light was incidental, a side effect. The real phenomenon was the sound itself. And if that's true, then we have been approaching this wrong. We scan the skies, we look for craft, for objects, for movement. We assume that contact, if it happens, will be visible, observable, physical. But what if it isn't? What if something has been here all along, existing not in space but in frequency? Not watching us but tuning us, testing us, calibrating. Think about how we communicate. Radio waves, television signals, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, satellites. We have filled the electromagnetic spectrum with our transmissions. We broadcast constantly, sending signals into space and across the surface of the Earth. What if something is broadcasting back, not through light, not through language, but through vibration, through frequency, through sound waves that exist just below the threshold of conscious perception? What if humanity is not being observed, but broadcast to? The implications are staggering. If a consciousness could encode information in sound, it would not need to physically travel. It would not need ships or craft or technology as we understand it. It would simply need to generate the correct frequency and allow that frequency to propagate through the medium of atmosphere, water, or earth. Sound travels through matter. It moves through air, through water, through stone. It can penetrate barriers that light cannot. It can reach into enclosed spaces, underground facilities, shielded structures. If something wanted to reach every human on Earth simultaneously, sound would be the perfect medium. And we would never see it coming. We would only feel it. I believe that's what happened to us on that road in Nevada. We intersected with a frequency, a transmission, a signal that was not meant for us but passed through us nonetheless. And for a brief window of time, we became aware of it. The hum was not a side effect. It was the primary phenomenon. Everything else, the light, the disorientation, the missing time, was our biology responding to something it was never designed to process. We were not abducted, we were scanned. And the scan continues. I believe this has been happening for decades, perhaps longer. I believe the reports of UFOs, the strange lights, the encounters in remote locations, I believe many of them are not sightings of physical objects, but intersections with this frequency. We see lights because our atmosphere reacts to the vibration. We lose time because the frequency disrupts our perception. We feel disoriented because our neural activity is being temporarily altered. And no one talks about it because it sounds insane. But it's not insane, it's terrifying. Because if I'm right, then we are not alone. We have never been alone. Something has been here, embedded in the fabric of our environment, operating on a spectrum we barely understand. Listening, broadcasting, waiting. Epilogue. Still listening. I no longer fear the night sky. I fear silence, because in silence you can hear what's underneath. The hum that never fully goes away. The frequency that exists just beyond perception, waiting for the moment when you're quiet enough to notice it. I don't think we were abducted that night. I don't think we were chosen. I think we simply became aware, briefly, accidentally, of something that has always been there. And now that I've heard it, I can't unhear it. Last month, I drove back to that stretch of road in Nevada. I wanted to see if anything had changed, if the area had been marked, restricted, studied. I wanted to know if anyone else had experienced what we did. The road was the same, empty, quiet, unremarkable. But when I turned off the engine and stepped outside, I felt it again. That subtle vibration, that pressure in the chest, the sense of being observed by something vast and incomprehensible. I stood there for 20 minutes listening. The hum was fainter now, or perhaps I had learned to filter it out. But it was there. It has always been there. I recorded audio on my phone, ran it through spectrum analysis software when I got home. The recording showed nothing unusual, no anomalies, no frequencies outside normal range. But I heard it. I felt it. And that's what I can't reconcile. If the frequency exists below the threshold of standard recording equipment, how widespread is it? How many people are intersecting with it daily without realizing what they're experiencing? How many reports of tinnitus, of unexplained anxiety, of strange dreams and disrupted sleep? How many of those are actually responses to this signal? I don't have answers, but I have questions. And I think asking those questions makes me a target. 3 weeks ago, my laptop was accessed remotely. Files were opened. Browsing history was viewed. Nothing was taken, but someone was looking. I don't know who, I don't know why, but I know it happened. My phone has been acting strangely again. Calls drop. Messages fail to send. Apps open on their own. It could be coincidence, it could be hardware failure, but I don't think it is. I think something noticed that I'm still paying attention, and it doesn't want me to. I have stopped posting my research online. I have stopped reaching out to witnesses. I have learned to be quiet about what I know, but I am still listening. Because if something can reach us through vibration alone, it never needed to land. It was already here, listening, waiting, tuning, and we never knew. I think about Kevin sometimes, about the moment he tried to open the door, about the voice or the suggestion that told him to step outside. I wonder what would have happened if he had. If Linda hadn't stopped him, if he had walked into that darkness while the hum surrounded us, would he have come back? Would he have been the same? I don't know, but I think about it. I think about it every time I hear the hum return. Every time I feel that pressure. Every time I close my eyes and sense something vast and incomprehensible turning its attention toward me. I think about what it wants, and I think about what happens when it finds it. If you're listening to this now, if you've made it this far, I want you to do something. Tonight, when you go to bed, turn off everything. The television, the music, the white noise machine. Let the room fall into complete silence, and then listen. Really listen. Not for something loud, not for something obvious. Listen for the hum, the low vibration that shouldn't be there, the pressure that builds slowly in your chest, the feeling that something is present, even though you're alone. If you hear it, if you feel it, don't panic. Don't try to run from it, because there's nowhere to run. It's already here. It has always been here. And now that you know what to listen for, you'll hear it everywhere. In the stillness of an empty room, in the space between heartbeats, in the silence that follows the question, are we alone? We're not. We never were. And the thing that's been here all along is patient. It doesn't need to be seen. It only needs to be heard. And once you hear it, you become part of the frequency, part of the signal, part of the broadcast. The hum doesn't fade because it stops. It fades because you stop noticing it. But it's still there, waiting for the moment you listen again. And when you do, you'll realize something that I realized years ago. Something that changed everything. The frequency isn't scanning us, it's calling us. And one day, someone is going to answer. Hey everyone, before we dive into tonight's story, I want to ask for your help. If you're enjoying this content, using your hype points on this video makes a bigger difference than you could possibly imagine. It genuinely helps the channel grow and reach more people who love this kind of content. If you're listening over on Spotify, leaving a review there also helps out tremendously. And if you're up for it, drop a comment telling us what time it is, where you are, and where in the world you're listening from. We absolutely love seeing where everyone's tuning in from, but only if you want to share. And of course, if you're enjoying what we do here, subscribing to the channel means the world to us. Alright, let's get into tonight's story. The calibration window. A quiet UFO encounter. No one was supposed to witness. There are moments in science when everything goes quiet in the wrong way, not the peaceful quiet of a solved problem or a confirmed hypothesis. The other kind. The kind that makes you check your equipment 3 times, reboot systems that have run flawlessly for months, and question whether the flaw is in the machinery or in your understanding of what machinery is supposed to measure. This is a story about one of those moments. It takes place at a research station so remote that most people have never heard of it. The work performed there is important but profoundly boring. Monitoring atmospheric conditions, calibrating instruments, and maintaining systems that feed data into larger networks. Most scientists never think about. It is the kind of job where nothing ever happens, which is exactly the point. Consistency is the goal. Anomalies are errors. Deviations are corrected. Until the night when every instrument disagreed with reality in precisely the same way. The person who experienced this event is a career environmental technician, someone trained to trust data over intuition, to follow protocols over hunches, and to assume equipment failure before considering impossible alternatives. This makes what happened next particularly significant. Because when someone conditioned to dismiss the extraordinary starts questioning whether the sky itself can be wrong, something fundamental has shifted. The official record of that night shows nothing unusual. Logs were filed, calibration was completed, systems returned to normal operations. But between the lines of those reports exists a different story. One about what happens when our tools for measuring reality briefly stop filtering out what they were never designed to detect. This is not a story about alien spacecraft descending from the clouds or mysterious lights racing across the horizon. There were no beams of light, no glowing orbs, no impossible maneuvers captured on video. What happened was quieter than that, more subtle, and in many ways more disturbing, because the thing that appeared that night did not arrive. It was already there, and the only reason anyone noticed was because, for a brief window of time, the instrument stopped telling reality what it was supposed to be. Chapter 1. The Assignment. The Kaibab Atmospheric Research Station sits on the edge of the Arizona Strip, a region so isolated that cellular signals are a memory, and the nearest town is measured in hours, not miles. The facility itself is modest, a cluster of prefabricated buildings, a communications tower, and a field of sensitive instruments designed to monitor atmospheric composition, electromagnetic fluctuations, and pressure variations across multiple altitudes. Maya Torres had worked at Kaibab for 6 years. She was not a scientist in the traditional sense. Her official title was Environmental Monitoring Technician, which meant she maintained the equipment, performed routine calibrations, and ensured that the data being collected remained accurate and consistent. It was solitary work, but she preferred it that way. No office politics, no mandatory meetings. Just her, the equipment, and the vast empty sky. Most of the time, the station ran itself. Automated systems collected data continuously, feeding information into national weather models and atmospheric research databases. Maya's job was to intervene when something went wrong or when scheduled maintenance required human oversight. She had performed calibration procedures hundreds of times. The process was straightforward. Power down sensors, run diagnostic tests, adjust settings based on known atmospheric baselines, and bring everything back online. Boring, predictable, exactly what scientific monitoring should be. The assignment that night was routine. A scheduled low-activity window had been designated for recalibration of the primary sensor array. Weather conditions were optimal. Clear skies, minimal wind, no storms within 1,000 miles. The timing was deliberate. Calibration worked best when the atmosphere was stable, with no external variables that might skew readings or interfere with baseline measurements. Maya arrived at the station just before sunset. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, painted in shades of orange and red as the sun dropped toward the horizon. She had always loved this time of day. The lights softened everything, made the emptiness feel less lonely. Inside the operations building, she logged into the primary system and reviewed the calibration schedule. Everything was green across the board. Air pressure, normal. Temperature gradients, within expected ranges. Electromagnetic readings, baseline static. The instruments showed exactly what they were supposed to show, which meant she could begin the shutdown sequence without complications. She initiated the protocol at 2100 hours. The sensors would go offline in stages, allowing her to test and recalibrate each subsystem individually. The entire process was expected to take 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours if she encountered any drift in the older equipment. She had brought coffee and a tablet loaded with a novel she had been meaning to finish. She expected boredom, not mystery. The first phase went smoothly. Pressure sensors came offline without issue. Temperature monitors powered down cleanly. The electromagnetic array, always the most finicky part of the system, shut down after a brief initialization delay, but nothing unusual. Maya worked methodically, running diagnostics on each component, making minor adjustments and logging everything in the maintenance database. It was during the second phase, when she began bringing systems back online, that the first inconsistency appeared. The air pressure readings spiked, not dramatically, not enough to trigger an alert, but enough to make her pause. The numbers suggested a localized pressure drop, as if a low-altitude weather front had suddenly materialized directly overhead. Maya frowned. The weather satellite feed showed nothing. The sky outside remained clear. She checked the sensor housing for obstructions or damage. Nothing. She reset the sensor. The reading stabilized briefly, then spiked again. Same magnitude, same pattern. Maya pulled up the historical data. Pressure anomalies at Kaibab were rare, but not unheard of. Occasionally, thermal gradients from the desert floor created brief instabilities, but those events were diffuse, spread across multiple sensors. This was different. The anomaly was concentrated in a single region of the sky, directly above the station, and it was not moving. She switched to the electromagnetic monitors. They had just come back online, and the readings made her stomach tighten. Localized distortion. High-frequency interference across multiple bands. The pattern was consistent with ionospheric disruption, the kind caused by solar flares or high-altitude electrical storms. But there were no storms, no solar activity, and the distortion was not atmospheric, it was spatial. Something was interfering with the instruments, something large, and according to the data, it was stationary, hovering, right above her. Chapter 2. The first inconsistency. Maya stood in the operations room, staring at the monitors. Her training told her this was equipment failure, probably a grounding issue or a calibration error she had introduced during the reset sequence. Instruments disagreed with each other all the time. That was why calibration existed. But instruments did not usually disagree in the same direction. She pulled up a multi-sensor overlay, combining data from pressure, electromagnetic, and thermal monitoring systems. Each system operated independently, using different technologies and different baselines. They should not correlate unless they were measuring the same phenomenon. The overlay showed a clear pattern. A region of space approximately 200 meters above the station was registering anomalies across all systems simultaneously. Pressure readings suggested localized or displacement, as if the air itself was being compressed or moved aside. Electromagnetic sensors detected interference patterns consistent with a dense conductive mass. Thermal imaging showed a cold spot, not frigid, but noticeably cooler than the surrounding atmosphere, and yet, visually, the sky was empty. Maya checked the radar feed. Nothing. The station's weather radar was not sophisticated, but it could detect aircraft, large birds, and significant atmospheric disturbances. The screen showed a flat green field, no contacts, no movement. She ran a systems diagnostic. All sensors returned green. No hardware faults, no communication errors. The instruments were functioning correctly. They were simply reporting something that should not exist. Maya felt the first creeping edge of unease. She had been trained to trust data over perception. If the instruments said something was there, something was there. But she also knew that reality did not bend to accommodate sensor readings. If the radar showed nothing and the sky looked normal, then the instruments were wrong. Except they were not wrong. They were precise, consistent, and impossibly unanimous. She saved the data stream to a local file and tagged it for review. Then, against every instinct that told her to stay inside and reboot the system, she grabbed a flashlight and walked outside. The night had settled fully. The sky was a deep, flawless black, scattered with stars that seemed sharper and closer than usual. The Milky Way stretched overhead in a pale ribbon, undisturbed. The air was cool and still, No wind, no sound except the faint hum of the equipment inside the station. Maya tilted her head back and looked directly overhead, toward the region where the instruments insisted something existed. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just stars, just darkness. Then she noticed the dimming. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. A section of the sky, roughly the size of her open hand, held at arm's length, where the stars seemed fainter, not obscured, not hidden, just less, as if the light from those stars was travelling through something that absorbed a fraction of it, not enough to block them entirely, just enough to dull them. Maya moved her head slightly to the left. The dimmed area did not move with her. She stepped forward. The area remained stationary in the sky. She stepped back. It stayed in place. Whatever this was, it was not an optical illusion. It was spatial. She raised her flashlight and aimed it directly at the dimmed region. The beam stretched upward, illuminating nothing but empty air. But as the light passed through the space where the stars looked fainter, it seemed to scatter, not reflect, not refract. It dispersed, as if the air itself had become thicker, denser, more resistant to light. Maya lowered the flashlight. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. She had seen atmospheric phenomena before: ice crystals, temperature inversions, light, pollution creating false halos. But this was none of those things. This was something occupying space without being visible. Something dense enough to register on pressure sensors, conductive enough to distort electromagnetic fields, and cold enough to show up on thermal imaging. And it was hovering, motionless, directly above the station. She stood there for a long moment, staring up at the faint wrongness in the sky. Then she turned and walked back inside. Chapter 3: Visual Confirmation Without Shape. Maya locked the door behind her, even though there was nothing to lock it against. The gesture was instinctive, a way of asserting control over a situation that felt increasingly uncontrollable. Inside, the monitors still showed the same anomaly, unchanged, unmoving. She pulled up the optical telescope feed, a system used for observing cloud formations and high-altitude atmospheric events. The telescope was programmed to track specific coordinates. She entered the location of the anomaly and waited for the image to load. The feed showed nothing, just stars, just darkness. But when she adjusted the exposure settings, something changed. The stars in the center of the frame dimmed. Not by much, maybe 15–20%. Enough to notice if you were looking for it. And around those dimmed stars, the darkness itself seemed textured. Not black, not empty, but thick, as if space itself had gained weight. Maya zoomed in. The texture became more apparent. It was not static. It was shifting very slowly, like heat distortion or the shimmer of air above hot pavement. But the air outside was cool. There was no thermal source, and the distortion was not confined to the visible spectrum. Infrared imaging showed the same effect. Ultraviolet showed it more clearly. Whatever this was, it existed across multiple wavelengths. She pulled up the spectral analysis software, a tool used to identify chemical compositions in atmospheric samples. She aimed the spectrometer toward the anomaly and ran a scan. The results made no sense. The software detected trace elements consistent with normal atmospheric composition: nitrogen, oxygen, argon, carbon dioxide. But the density measurements were wrong. The air in the region above the station was registering as significantly denser than it should be. Not compressed, not pressurized, just denser, as if something was occupying the same space as the air without displacing it. Maya saved the data and cross-referenced it with historical records. She found 3 similar events, all logged as equipment malfunctions, all dismissed after brief review, all occurring during calibration windows. A pattern. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. She was not a physicist. She did not have the training to explain what she was seeing, but she understood measurement. And she understood when measurements stopped making sense. The instruments were not malfunctioning, they were detecting something real, something that existed in physical space but did not behave like matter, something that absorbed light without reflecting it, displaced air without moving it, and registered on sensors without appearing on radar. She stood and walked back outside. This time she brought the portable spectrometer. She wanted confirmation. She wanted to be sure. The dimmed section of sky was still there, still stationary. She aimed the spectrometer directly at it and ran another scan. The readings matched the telescope data. Increased density, no chemical anomalies, just space that felt heavier than it should. Maya lowered the device and looked up. The stars were still dim. The air still felt thick. And for the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that this was not a calibration error. This was something else, something that had always been there, invisible, undetected, until, briefly, the instrument stopped filtering it out. Chapter 4. The Shadow. That isn't dark. Maya had been trained to approach problems methodically, identify variables, eliminate possibilities, narrow the field until only one explanation remained. But the more she measured, the less sense anything made. She returned to the operations room and pulled up every available data stream: seismic sensors, acoustic monitors, magnetic field detectors, infrared, radar, everything the station had. Most systems showed nothing unusual, but a few registered faint anomalies, always in the same location, always localized to the region directly overhead, and always inconsistent with known atmospheric or electromagnetic phenomena. The seismic sensors buried 30 meters below the surface detected a faint vibration. Not rhythmic, not mechanical, just a persistent low-frequency hum, barely above background noise. The acoustic monitors picked up the same thing, a sound that was not quite a sound, more like pressure, a sensation of density in the air. Maya put on headphones and isolated the acoustic signal. It was subtle, almost below the threshold of hearing, a deep resonant tone that seemed to pulse very slowly. The frequency was low enough that it felt more than heard, a vibration in the chest, a weight in the skull. She removed the headphones and rubbed her temples. She had been awake for 12 hours. Fatigue was setting in. Maybe that explained the unease. Maybe she was reading patterns into noise. But the instruments did not get tired, and they all agreed. She checked the time. 2,300 hours. The calibration window was scheduled to close at midnight. After that, systems would return to full automated monitoring. Whatever this was, it would either disappear or remain. Either way, she would have data, evidence, something to present to her supervisors. She decided to go outside one more time. She wanted to see if the anomaly had changed, if it had moved, if it had done anything that might help her understand what she was looking at. The night air hit her as she stepped outside, cooler now, dry. The stars overhead were brilliant, except for that one section, that one patch of sky where they seemed muted. Maya walked away from the station, into the open desert. She wanted distance, perspective. She wanted to see if the anomaly was fixed to a location, or if it was something else, something relative. She walked 50 meters, stopped, looked up. The dimmed region of sky had shifted. Not much, but noticeably. It was no longer directly overhead. It was slightly to the east. She walked another 50 meters, looked up again. The anomaly had shifted again, always maintaining the same relative position, always staying between her and a specific point in space. Maya's chest tightened. This was not a localized atmospheric effect. This was not equipment error. This was something occupying a fixed position in three-dimensional space. And as she moved, her perspective of it changed. She pulled out her phone and opened the compass app. She marked her current position, then walked in a wide circle around the station, stopping every 30 meters to check the sky. The anomaly tracked, always visible, always in the same relative position. A fixed point in space that only revealed itself through the absence of light. Maya completed the circle and returned to her starting position. She checked her notes. The anomaly was located approximately 200 meters above the station, offset slightly to the northeast. It did not move, it did not rotate, it did not pulse or flicker. It simply existed, silent, invisible, and utterly indifferent to being observed. She stood there for a long time, staring up at it. The desert around her was silent. No wind, no insects, no distant hum of traffic or aircraft. Just the vast empty night and the faint wrongness in the sky that refused to resolve into anything she could name. And then, very suddenly, it was gone. Chapter 5. The calibration window closes. Maya did not see it disappear. One moment it was there, faint, subtle, but undeniably present, and the next moment it was not. The stars in that section of sky brightened instantly, as if a veil had been lifted. The air felt lighter. The pressure in her chest eased. She checked her watch. Midnight, exactly. The calibration window had closed. She ran back to the operations room and pulled up the sensor logs. The transition was visible in the data. At precisely 0 hours, all anomalies ceased. Pressure readings normalized. Electromagnetic interference vanished. Thermal signatures returned to baseline. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, but there was no switch, no mechanism, no physical process that could explain such an abrupt transition. Maya scrolled through the logs, looking for any indication of movement, anything that might suggest the object had departed, but the data showed no departure, no acceleration, no directional change. The anomaly did not leave, it simply stopped. Being detectable, she exported the data to an external drive and flagged the event in the maintenance log. Protocol required her to report any unusual sensor activity. She wrote a brief summary, careful to keep her language clinical and factual. Anomalous readings, localized disturbances, possible equipment drift. She did not mention the visual observations. She did not mention the dimmed stars or the spatial wrongness, or the sense that something vast and invisible had been hovering above the station, watching. She submitted the report and powered down the non-essential systems. The calibration was complete. Everything was back online. The station would resume normal operations. She sat in the operations room for another hour, staring at the monitors. Everything was green. Everything was normal. But she could not shake the feeling that something was still there, just beyond the range of the instruments, just outside the boundaries of what the sensors were designed to detect. At 0200 hours, she finally left the station and drove back to her quarters, a small prefab unit 10 miles down the access road. She did not sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night in her mind. The data, the observations, the impossible consistency of something that should not exist. The next morning, she received an automated message from the central office. Her report had been reviewed. The anomalies were classified as sensor drift caused by the recalibration process. No further action required. The data had been archived and flagged as corrupted. Maya read the message twice. Then she opened the external drive where she had saved the raw data files. They were still there, untouched, unaltered, proof that what she had seen was real. But proof of what? Chapter 6. The data problem. For the next 3 days, Maya tried to put the event out of her mind. She returned to her routine, monitored systems, ran diagnostics, maintained equipment. Everything functioned normally. The station hummed along quietly, collecting data, feeding it into larger networks, contributing to models and forecasts that scientists thousands of miles away would analyze without ever thinking about where the data came from. But Maya could not stop thinking about that night. She pulled up the archived files during her off hours, examining the sensor logs over and over. The patterns were too consistent to be noise, too precise to be drift, and the visual observations, the dimmed stars, the spatial displacement, the way the anomaly tracked with perspective, those could not be explained by equipment error. She researched atmospheric phenomena, temperature inversions, light refraction, ice crystal formations. None of them matched. She looked into electromagnetic anomalies, solar wind interactions, ionospheric disturbances. Nothing fit. She expanded her search. UFO reports, military sightings, classified radar data. Most of it was noise, speculation, misidentified aircraft or weather balloons. But buried in the noise were a handful of cases that felt familiar. Reports of objects that did not reflect light, radar contacts that appeared and disappeared without movement, pressure anomalies detected by weather stations during clear conditions. All of them dismissed, all of them written off as equipment malfunction or observer error. Maya began to suspect that the problem was not with the data. The problem was with the system that reviewed the data, a system designed to filter out anomalies, to reject readings that did not conform to expected patterns, to classify the impossible as corrupted. She reached out to a colleague at another monitoring station, carefully, indirectly. She described the sensor readings without mentioning her own observations. She asked if he had ever seen anything similar. His response was immediate. Yes, once, 3 years ago. During a calibration window, localized pressure drop, electromagnetic interference, visual distortion. He had reported it. The data had been flagged as corrupted. He was told not to pursue it. Maya thanked him and ended the conversation. She contacted another colleague, a technician at a facility in Nevada. Same question, same careful phrasing, same answer. She spoke to 6 people over the next week. 5 of them had experienced similar events, always during calibration windows, always dismissed as equipment error. 1 of them had tried to escalate the issue. He was reassigned. A pattern was forming, not of sightings, but of silence, a quiet, systematic suppression of data that did not fit the expected model. Maya realized something unsettling. The system was not designed to detect anomalies. It was designed to filter them out, to smooth over inconsistencies, to ensure that the data fed into larger networks remained clean, predictable, and free of anything that might require explanation. Which meant that if something was out, there something invisible, something silent, something that only became detectable when instruments briefly dropped their assumptions, it could exist indefinitely without ever being acknowledged. Not because it was hidden, because it was filtered. Chapter 7. Unofficial confirmation. Maya did not escalate her findings. She had seen what happened to people who pushed too hard. Reassignments, quiet dismissals. The message was clear. Do your job, maintain the equipment, and do not ask questions about data that does not fit the model. But she continued her research. Quietly, methodically. She built a database of similar events, cross-referencing sensor logs from stations across the country. She looked for patterns, locations, timing, conditions. What she found disturbed her. The events were not random. They clustered around specific types of facilities: research stations, weather monitoring sites, remote observatories, places with sensitive instruments, places that performed regular calibrations. And the events almost always occurred during low-activity windows, periods when systems were temporarily reset, when filters were briefly disabled, when instruments measured reality without telling it what it was allowed to be. Maya began to formulate a theory. It was speculative, it lacked physical mechanism, but it explained the data better than anything else she had considered. The anomalies were not arriving. They were already there, invisible, undetectable, under normal conditions. But during calibration windows, when instruments operated without filters, without assumptions, without built-in corrections, they briefly registered something that existed outside the expected model. Something large, something dense, something that occupied space without interacting with light in conventional ways. She tested the theory by reviewing historical data from her own station. She went back years, searching for anomalies that occurred during calibration. Windows. She found dozens, all logged, all dismissed as drift or corruption, all sharing the same basic characteristics: localized pressure changes, electromagnetic interference, visual distortion. And all of them, she realized, had been occurring in the same region of sky, directly above the station, for years. Whatever this was, it was not transient, it was persistent, and it had been there long before Maya arrived, long before the station was built, possibly long before anyone thought to measure the sky with instruments sensitive enough to detect it. She saved her findings to an encrypted file and considered her options. She could report this, formally, with evidence, but she already knew what would happen. The data would be flagged. The files would be archived. She would be told, politely but firmly, to move on. Or she could stay quiet, continue monitoring, wait for another calibration window, gather more data, build a case too large to ignore. She chose the latter. Chapter 8. The theory forms. Maya spent the next 2 months preparing. She upgraded the station's data logging systems, increasing storage capacity and resolution. She synchronized her instruments with atomic clocks to ensure precise temporal correlation. She mapped the sky above the station in multiple wavelengths, creating a baseline that would allow her to detect even subtle deviations. And she waited. The next scheduled calibration window was set for late March. Clear weather, minimal solar activity, optimal conditions. She submitted the maintenance request and received approval without issue. As the date approached, Maya found herself both anxious and excited. She had spent years performing routine tasks, maintaining systems that functioned perfectly and produced nothing unexpected. The monotony had been comforting, safe, but now knowing what might be waiting just beyond the range of her instruments. The routine felt insufficient. She arrived at the station 3 hours, early on the night of the calibration. She checked every system twice. She verified data logging. She ran diagnostics on backup instruments. Everything was ready. At 2100 hours, she initiated the shutdown sequence. The sensors went offline in stages: pressure monitors, temperature arrays, electromagnetic detectors. One by one, the systems powered down, leaving brief windows of unfiltered observation as they reset. The first anomaly appeared 17 minutes into the process. Localized pressure drop, directly overhead. Same magnitude as before, same spatial characteristics. Maya's pulse quickened. She activated the optical telescope and aimed it at the coordinates. The stars dimmed, the air thickened. The instruments registered something vast and silent, occupying space 200 meters above the station. She stepped outside. The night was clear. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions. And overhead, in a section of sky that should have been empty, the stars looked wrong. Maya raised her spectrometer and ran a full scan. Density readings spiked. Chemical composition remained normal, but the spatial characteristics were impossible. The air above the station was denser than it should be. Not compressed, not heated, just denser. As if something was sharing the same space as the atmosphere without displacing it. She adjusted the spectrometer settings, increasing sensitivity. The readings became more detailed. The density gradient was not uniform. It varied slightly, creating a faint texture in the data, almost like a surface, almost like the boundary of something solid. Maya's mind raced. She had spent months thinking about this moment, preparing theories, considering explanations. But now, standing beneath the dimmed stars, staring at data that should not exist, all her theories felt inadequate. This was not a vehicle. It was not a craft passing through. It was not a weather phenomenon or an atmospheric anomaly. This was something, occupying a fixed position in space. Something that had been there for years, possibly decades, invisible except during brief windows when instruments stopped filtering reality. And the most disturbing part was not that it existed. The most disturbing part was that it had gone unnoticed for so long, not because it was hidden, not because it was secret, but because the systems designed to observe the sky were also designed to reject observations that did not fit the model. Maya stood there for a long time, recording data, taking measurements, documenting everything. And then, at midnight, the calibration window closed. The anomaly vanished. The stars brightened. The instruments normalized. But this time, Maya had proof. High-resolution data, multiple sensors, visual confirmation. Everything logged and time-stamped. Evidence that could not be dismissed as corruption or drift. She returned to the operations room and compiled the data into a report. She made it thorough, clinical, factual. She included graphs, spectral analysis, and comparative data from historical events. She submitted it to her supervisor with a request for formal review. The response came 3 days later. Her report had been received. The data had been reviewed by the technical team. The anomalies were classified as calibration artifacts. No further action required. The files had been archived. Maya read the message and felt something inside her harden. They were not ignoring the data because it was insufficient. They were ignoring it because acknowledging it would require explanations they could not provide. Chapter 9. The After Effect. Maya continued working at the station. She performed her duties. She maintained the equipment. She filed reports. But something had changed. The work felt hollow now, performative. She was maintaining systems designed to measure reality, while simultaneously filtering out anything that challenged the model. She found herself staring at the sky, more often, especially at night, especially overhead. She knew the anomaly was there. She could not see it. She could not measure it without triggering a calibration window. But she could feel it. A presence, a weight, something vast and patient occupying space that everyone agreed was empty. The sensation was not fear, it was proximity, an awareness of being observed by something that existed in the margins of perception, something that had been there all along, invisible, until briefly, accidentally, the instruments noticed. Maya began to wonder how many other things existed in those margins, how many phenomena went undetected because the tools designed to observe them were also designed to reject observations that did not conform to expectations. How much of reality was filtered out before it ever reached human awareness? She thought about the scientific method, hypothesis, observation, testing. The process works beautifully when applied to predictable, repeatable phenomena. But what about the things that only appeared when systems temporarily dropped their assumptions? What about the things that existed outside the boundaries of what instruments were programmed to detect? Science measured what it expected to find, and when it found something unexpected, it classified it as error. Maya started keeping a personal log, not official reports, just observations, notes, thoughts. She documented the times when the sky felt wrong, when the stars seemed dimmer, when the air felt thicker. She recorded sensor readings during routine operations, looking for faint anomalies that might indicate the presence of something the systems were designed to ignore. She found patterns, subtle, easily dismissed, but consistent. The world, she realized, was layered. Visible reality existed alongside something else, something that occupied the same space but did not interact with it in conventional ways. And humanity, with all its instruments and models and expectations, remained oblivious, not because the evidence was absent, but because the systems designed to collect evidence were also designed to discard anything that did not fit. Epilogue. The part we never measure. Maya still works at the Kaibab Atmospheric Research Station. She still performs calibrations. She still maintains equipment. And every few months, during scheduled low-activity windows, she watches the instruments briefly register something that should not exist. She no longer reports it. There is no point. The system is not designed to acknowledge anomalies. It is designed to smooth them over, to classify them as error, to ensure that the data remains clean and predictable. But Maya knows the truth. The anomalies are not errors. They are glimpses, brief accidental observations of something that exists beyond the boundaries of what we are prepared to measure. She has stopped thinking about the anomaly as a single event. She now understands it as a symptom, evidence that reality is more complex than our tools allow us to perceive, that the instruments we use to observe the world also constrain what we are able to see. Science measures what it expects to find, but expectation is a filter, and filters, by design, remove signal along with noise. Maya wonders sometimes what would happen if the filters were removed entirely, if instruments were allowed to measure reality without assumptions, without corrections, without built-in models of what is and is not possible. She suspects the results would be overwhelming, incomprehensible, full of phenomena that defy explanation, but also, perhaps, full of truth. Because the thing that appeared above the station that night did not arrive. It was already there. And the only reason anyone noticed was because, briefly, the instrument stopped telling reality what it was allowed to be. Maya has come to accept that she will never fully understand what she observed. She does not have the tools, the training, the framework, but she no longer needs to understand. Because understanding is not the point. The point is awareness, the recognition that the world is larger, stranger, and more layered than we allow ourselves to perceive, that the boundaries of our knowledge are defined not by what exists, but by what we are willing to measure. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn, when the desert stretches endlessly in all directions and the stars overhead burn cold and distant, Maya looks up at the section of sky where the anomaly once appeared. She knows it is still there, invisible, silent, indifferent, and she feels something that is not quite fear and not quite wonder, a recognition that the universe is full of things we do not see, not because they are hidden, but because we have built systems that ensure we never look. The instruments hum quietly in the operations room. The data flows smoothly into networks and models. The world remains predictable, explainable, safe, but Maya knows better, and she suspects deep down that the universe is waiting, patient, persistent, for the moment when humanity finally decides to stop filtering reality and start measuring what is actually there. Until then, the anomalies will remain, logged as errors, dismissed as drift, quietly archived in databases no one will ever review. And overhead in the vast emptiness of the night sky, something vast and invisible will continue to occupy space that everyone agrees is empty. Because we never detected them because they arrived. We detected them because, briefly, we stopped telling reality what it was allowed to be. Before we begin tonight's journey into the unknown, I need to ask something of you. If this story gives you that perfect mix of intrigue and unease, if it helps you drift off or keeps you thinking long after it ends, please hit that hype button. It genuinely helps this channel more than you possibly know, and it tells me what kind of mysteries you want to hear more of. Also, I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. So if you feel like it, drop a comment letting me know what time it is for you and where in the world you're listening. No pressure, but we've built an incredible community here, and seeing how far these stories travel never gets old. Now settle in, turn down the lights, and let me tell you about something that happened on a quiet mountain road in Colorado. Something that still doesn't have an explanation. The visitor at mile marker 7. There are roads in this country that seem to exist outside normal space. Stretches of asphalt where the rules bend just slightly, where reality feels paper thin. Highway 43, cutting through the mountains west of Boulder, Colorado, is one of them. And if you drive it late enough at night, when the world narrows down to your headlights and the endless dark pressing in from all sides, you might understand why some people who take that road never make it home. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I saw, what I experienced, and what I can never unsee. It was October of 2011. I was working the graveyard shift at a natural gas monitoring station about 30 miles outside town. spending my nights alone in a concrete box surrounded by machinery and mountains. The work was mind-numbing, but the drive home made up for it. Empty roads, clean air, the kind of silence that only exists at 3 a.m. when even the nocturnal world has gone to sleep. I'd driven that same route home hundreds of times. I knew every curve, every pothole, every place where deer like to cross. I knew the small white markers counting down the miles, their reflective paint catching my headlights, like tiny ghosts along the shoulder. Mile marker 7 sat at the bottom of a long descent, right where the road straightened out, before climbing again into dense pine forest. I'd passed it so many times, I barely noticed it anymore. Until the night everything changed. It was a Tuesday. The shift had been routine. Nothing unusual in the logs, no alarms, no issues. I clocked out at 2:45 in the morning, climbed into my truck, and started the winding drive back to town. The temperature had dropped into the 30s, cold enough that my breath fogged the windshield until the heater kicked in. The radio played classic rock at low volume, just enough to keep me company without being distracting. As I came down the long slope toward mile marker 7, my headlights swept across something that made me ease off the gas. A car sat pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking their steady orange, rhythm into the darkness. It was a newer model sedan, maybe a Honda or Toyota, dark-coloured, positioned neatly on the gravel, as if the driver had carefully chosen that exact spot to stop. My first thought was a flat tyre or engine trouble. My second thought was to keep driving. It was nearly 3 a.m, I was tired, and stopping for strangers on empty mountain roads isn't exactly recommended, but something made me slow down. Maybe it was the way the hazard lights looked so lonely out there. Maybe it was the fact that in all my late night drives, I'd never seen another vehicle stopped on this particular stretch. Maybe it was something else entirely. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of the stranded car, leaving my engine running and my headlights on. Through my rearview mirror, I could see the sedan more clearly now. The driver's door stood open. Not just unlocked, but hanging wide open, like someone had gotten out in a hurry. The interior light was on, casting a pale yellow glow into the surrounding darkness. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and stepped out into the cold. The night air hit me immediately, sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and frost. My breath plumed white in front of my face. Gravel crunched under my boots as I walked back toward the sedan, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded strange in all that emptiness, too loud and too small at the same time. "Anyone need help?" No response. Just the clicking of the hazard lights and the faint ticking of a cooling engine. I approached the driver's side, moving carefully, half expecting someone to pop up from behind the car. The beam of my flashlight played across the interior. Empty driver's seat. Empty passenger seat. Key still in the ignition. A paper coffee cup lay on its side on the centre console. Brown liquid soaked into the fabric. The cup was from a gas station in town. The kind they fill for $2 at the counter. It looked fresh. I reached through the open door and touched the hood. Still warm. Not hot like it had just been running, but warm enough to tell me this car hadn't been here long. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe less. That's when I noticed there were no footprints. The shoulder was covered in a thin layer of dust and small gravel. My boots had left clear impressions, leading from my truck to where I stood. But around the sedan, around the open door where someone should have stepped out, there was nothing. No prints, no disturbance in the dust, nothing to indicate which direction the driver had gone. I straightened up, playing my flashlight beam along the ground, looking for any sign of where they might have walked. The light caught something on the passenger seat. A cell phone. Screen dark, connected to a charging cable. Next to it, a wallet. I didn't touch either one, but I could see the corner of a driver's license sticking out of the wallet, the photo too small to make out from where I stood. The radio inside the car was on, but not playing music, just static, the kind of white noise that fills empty frequencies, faint and constant and oddly hypnotic. I reached in and turned it off, and in the sudden silence that followed, I heard something else. A hum, low and distant, coming from somewhere in the tree line to my right. It wasn't mechanical exactly, but it wasn't natural either. It had a rhythm to it, a regularity that felt wrong somehow. Like a generator running in the distance, but smoother, more resonant, the kind of sound you feel in your chest as much as hear with your ears. I turned toward the trees, flashlight beam probing the darkness between the trunks. The forest here was dense ponderosa pine, and Douglas fir growing thick enough that daylight barely penetrated at ground level. At night, it was a solid wall of black, punctuated by the narrow columns of tree trunks. And somewhere in that darkness, something was making that sound. I should have gotten back in my truck. I should have called the police, reported the abandoned vehicle, and driven home. But standing there in the cold, with that strange hum vibrating through the air, I felt pulled forward. Not compelled exactly, just curious in a way that overrode common sense. I took a step toward the tree line, then another. The hum grew slightly louder, but its quality didn't change. Still regular, still resonant, still wrong. My flashlight beam swept back and forth across the darkness, catching nothing but trees and shadows and the occasional glint of animal eyes that disappeared as soon as I focused on them. I was maybe 10 feet from the edge of the forest when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was a reflection, my flashlight bouncing off something metallic deeper in the woods. But when I turned my light away, the glow remained, faint and white, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. It appeared to be about 50 yards, into the trees, partially obscured by the dense undergrowth. The pulsing was slow and deliberate, bright then dim, bright then dim. The rhythm matched the hum I was hearing, or maybe my brain was just making connections that weren't there. Either way, I stood there transfixed, watching that gentle pulse expand and contract in the darkness. Then it moved. Not quickly, not erratically, but it dipped behind a rise in the terrain, disappeared for a moment, then rose again on the other side, maintaining that same steady pulse. The movement was too smooth, too controlled. A handheld light would bob and weave as someone walked. A vehicle's headlights would have a different quality, a harshness that this soft glow lacked. This moved like it was floating. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to leave, to get back in my truck, drive to town, and let someone else deal with this. But I've never been good at listening to the rational parts of my brain, especially when confronted with something I can't explain. I stepped into the forest. The temperature dropped immediately, not dramatically but noticeably, like stepping into a walk-in cooler. The air felt heavier too, thicker somehow, pressing against my skin. I had to consciously remind myself to breathe normally. Sound changed as well. My footsteps, which had crunched clearly on the gravel shoulder, now seemed muffled despite the carpet of dry pine needles beneath my boots. Even my breathing sounded distant, like I was hearing it through a wall. The hum was louder here, but it had the same muffled quality, as if the forest itself was absorbing all sharp edges of noise. I pushed through the underbrush, flashlight beam bouncing off tree trunks and scanning for the pulsing light. It was harder to track now that I was actually among the trees, the dense growth breaking up my line of sight. I caught glimpses of it ahead, and to my right, still pulsing, still moving in that unnaturally smooth way. My arm hair was standing on end. I noticed it when I shifted my grip on the flashlight. the sleeve of my jacket rubbing against skin that felt electrically charged. Static, I thought. The air was full of static, the kind that builds up before a thunderstorm, though the sky had been perfectly clear. I'd walked maybe 30 yards into the forest when I almost stepped on it. My flashlight beam swung down just in time to catch the pattern in the dirt at my feet. 3 circles, each maybe 2 feet in diameter, overlapping in the centre. They were pressed into the ground, the earth within them compacted and smooth, while the edges were sharp and defined. No gradual indentation, no scuff marks, just perfect circles intersecting at precise angles. I crouched down, playing my light across the pattern. The dirt inside the circles was darker than the surrounding soil, as if it had been subjected to heat or pressure. I touched the edge of one circle with my finger. The boundary was so clean, it felt machined, like someone had used a giant compass to carve it into the ground. But there were no tool marks, no footprints around it, no tyre tracks, nothing to indicate how this pattern had been made or who had made it. I stood up slowly, a cold weight settling in my stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. The pulsing light was closer now, much closer. I could see it clearly between the trees, maybe 20 yards away, hovering about 6 feet off the ground. The glow painted the nearby tree trunks white, casting long shadows that swayed despite the lack of wind. The hum had changed. It was no longer a distant vibration, but a tangible presence, resonating in my bones, making my teeth ache. And beneath it, just barely audible, was something else. A clicking sound, rapid and irregular, like Morse code being tapped out at high speed. I raised my flashlight, pointing it directly at the pulsing light. The light stopped pulsing. It went from that gentle, rhythmic expansion and contraction to a steady, brilliant point of white, light so intense I had to squint. The hum cut off as if someone had flipped a switch. The clicking stopped. Even the ambient forest sounds, the ones I hadn't consciously noticed until they vanished, went silent. In that absolute quiet, something moved between the trees. I want to be clear about what I saw. I'm not going to dress it up or exaggerate. I'm not going to tell you it was a creature from another world or a demon from hell or anything like that, because I don't know what it was. I can only tell you what I observed with my own eyes in the beam of my flashlight. It was tall, easily 7 feet, maybe taller. The silhouette was humanoid in the broadest sense, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but the proportions were wrong. The limbs were too long and too thin, like someone had taken a human form and stretched it vertically. The way it moved was wrong too. Joints bending at angles that didn't quite match human anatomy, giving each step a liquid quality that made my stomach turn. The worst part was the skin. In the white glow of my flashlight, it looked wet, like polished stone or damp clay. It reflected light in a way that organic tissue shouldn't, catching and throwing back the beam in odd directions. The colour was difficult to pin down, somewhere between grey and pale green, but it seemed to shift as the thing moved, as if the surface was somehow translucent. Where the head should have been, there was only smoothness, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a curved surface that tapered slightly at what I assumed was the top. And yet I had the overwhelming sense that it was looking at me, studying me. It didn't approach, it simply stood there, about 15 feet away, perfectly still, except for the slightest tilt of its head, like a bird examining something curious on the ground. I couldn't move. Every muscle in my body had locked up, refusing to respond to the screaming commands from my brain to run, to move, to do anything except stand there like an idiot, with my flashlight pointed at something that shouldn't exist. We stayed like that for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Me frozen in place, flashlight beam trembling slightly in my hand, it motionless between the trees, that smooth head tilted at its unnatural angle. Then I blinked. It wasn't a conscious decision. My eyes were dry from staring, and they blinked automatically, the way eyes do. The action took maybe a quarter of a second. Eyelids close, eyelids open. But when my eyes opened again, everything was different. I was no longer standing in the same spot. My flashlight was pointing at the ground instead of ahead. The pulsing light was gone. The brilliant white point was gone. The figure between the trees was gone. And most disturbingly, when I looked down at my wrist, my watch had stopped. The second hand sat frozen between the 11 and 12, the digital display completely dark. I spun around, trying to orient myself. The pattern of 3 overlapping circles was behind me now, at least 20 feet behind me, but I didn't remember walking away from it. I didn't remember moving at all. My heart was hammering against my ribs. My breath came in short, sharp gasps that fogged white in the cold air. I backed away from where I'd been standing, flashlight beam jerking across the forest floor, half expecting to see that smooth, featureless head emerging from behind every tree. Nothing, just empty forest and shadows. I turned and ran. Branches whipped at my face and snagged at my jacket. My boots slipped on pine needles and caught on hidden roots. I didn't care. I crashed through the underbrush like a panicked animal, flashlight beam bouncing wildly, until I burst out of the tree line onto the gravel shoulder. My truck sat where I'd left it, headlights still on, engines still running. The abandoned sedan was still there too, hazard lights still blinking their steady rhythm. But the driver's door was closed now. I was certain it had been open when I'd walked into the forest. Absolutely certain. I ran to my truck and climbed in, slamming the door and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the transmission into drive. I pulled back onto the highway and accelerated, not looking back, not slowing down until the lights of town appeared on the horizon. It was only when I pulled into my driveway that I realised how much time had passed. My shift ended at 2:45. I'd left the station by 3. The drive normally took 25 minutes. But according to my phone, which unlike my watch still worked, it was now 4:37 in the morning. I'd lost nearly an hour. I sat in my truck in my own driveway and tried to account for the missing time. Walking to the abandoned car, maybe 5 minutes. Examining it, another 5. Walking into the forest and back, even at a leisurely pace, maybe 10 minutes total. That left 40 minutes I couldn't explain. 40 minutes that existed in the space of a single blink. I should have been exhausted, but I was wired, adrenaline still flooding my system. I went inside, poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey I didn't really want, and sat at my kitchen table, trying to make sense of what had happened. When the sun finally came up, I called the police non-emergency line and reported the abandoned vehicle at mile marker 7. I gave them a description, the approximate location, and said I'd noticed it on my drive home, but hadn't stopped because I was alone, and it was the middle of the night. I didn't mention the pulsing light. I didn't mention the figure in the trees. I didn't mention anything that would make them think I was crazy or wasting their time. The dispatcher thanked me and said they'd send someone to check it out. 3 days later, I saw a news article in the local paper. Police had recovered an abandoned vehicle on Highway 43 near mile marker 7. The car was registered to a 32-year-old man from Boulder, named Marcus Webb. He'd been reported missing 4 days earlier when he failed to show up for work. His car was found in perfect working condition. Keys in the ignition, personal belongings untouched. There was no sign of foul play and no indication of where Mr. Webb might have gone. What the article didn't mention, What I only learned later from a friend who worked dispatch was that Marcus Webb's phone had last pinged a cell tower near mile marker 7 at 11:43 at night, the night before he was reported missing, 3 full days before I found his car, but the engine had been warm when I touched it. That night, and for many nights after, I dreamed. Not the normal fragmented dreams everyone has, but something more vivid and specific. I dreamed of circles overlapping in precise geometric patterns. I dreamed of a low hum that vibrated through everything, making reality itself shimmer like heat waves over asphalt. And I dreamed of light, brilliant white light that pulsed like a heartbeat, calling out in rhythms I almost understood. I woke up each morning with a headache and a sense of urgency I couldn't explain, like there was something I needed to do, somewhere I needed to be, but I couldn't remember what or where. I tried to go back to normal life. I went to work, did my job, drove home. But I couldn't drive past mile marker 7 without slowing down, without scanning the tree line for any sign of that pulsing light. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I'd encountered out there wasn't finished with me. 2 weeks after finding Marcus Webb's car, I started researching, not casually, but obsessively. I spent hours in the public library, scrolling through newspaper archives and police reports. I filed Freedom of Information requests with the county sheriff's department. I talked to anyone who would listen about missing persons cases in the area. What I found disturbed me more than the encounter itself. In the previous 18 months, 3 other vehicles had been found abandoned along Highway 43, all within a 2-mile stretch centred on mile marker 7, all in perfect working condition, all with keys in the ignition and personal belongings inside, all with no sign of the drivers. A 26-year-old woman named Jennifer Acosta reported missing in March of 2010. Her car was found pulled over on the shoulder with the driver's door open. Her purse, phone and jacket were still inside. Security footage from a gas station showed her filling up her tank at 9:15 that evening. Her phone last pinged at 10:30 near mile marker 7. A 41-year-old man named Robert Chen reported missing in July of 2010. His car was found idling on the shoulders with the headlights on. His wallet and a half-eaten sandwich were on the passenger seat. His phone last pinged at 1:17 in the morning near mile marker 7. A 19-year-old named Ashley Nolan reported missing in January of 2011. Her car was found locked with the windows down and the radio playing. Her backpack and laptop were in the back seat. Her phone last pinged at 11:55 at night near mile marker 7. 4 missing people in 18 months, all last seen on the same stretch of road. All vanished without a trace. The police reports classified them as voluntary disappearances or possible accidents. The working theory was that people were pulling over for unknown reasons, becoming disoriented, and wandering into the forest where they succumbed to exposure or fell into ravines. It happened, the reports said. People got turned around in the mountains. They made poor decisions. They didn't respect the wilderness. But none of the search and rescue operations found bodies. None of the cadaver dogs picked up any scent trails. And in each case, the vehicles were found in conditions that suggested the drivers had just stepped out for a moment, not that they'd abandoned them permanently. I became obsessed with mile marker 7. I drove out there during the day, parking where Marcus Webb's car had been, and hiked into the forest. I found the spot where I'd seen the overlapping circles, or at least where I thought it had been. The pattern was gone, erased by weather and time, but something about the location felt familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. I brought a handheld GPS unit with me on these trips. I marked waypoints, tracked my routes, tried to create a map of the area, but the GPS acted strangely near certain spots. The signal would drop, the coordinates would jump around, the battery would drain far faster than it should. There was a roughly circular area, maybe 50 yards in diameter, where the GPS simply wouldn't function at all. I brought a camera and took hundreds of photos. Most showed nothing but ordinary forest, trees and undergrowth, and the occasional wildlife. But a few, just a handful, showed something else. Blurred streaks of light that hadn't been visible when I took the picture. Patches of darkness that seemed to absorb detail rather than reveal it. And in one image, barely visible in the background, a shape that might have been a tree trunk, but had the proportions of something standing upright. I brought audio recording equipment and captured hours of ambient sound. Again, most of it was exactly what you'd expect from a mountain forest. Wind in the trees, birds calling, the distant rush of water from a creek. But when I played the recordings back through editing software, filtering out the natural sounds, something remained. A low-frequency hum right at the edge of human hearing, constant and regular. I isolated that hum and played with the waveform, stretching it, compressing it, trying to find patterns, and I found one. The hum wasn't random, it pulsed in a specific rhythm. 3 quick rises in frequency, followed by a pause, then 3 more rises, over and over, encoded in sound so low most people would never consciously hear it. 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, pause, like a signal, like a beacon. I was reviewing these audio recordings one evening in late November. Headphones on, volume turned up to catch every detail. When I heard something that made me rip the headphones off so fast I yanked the cable out of my laptop. In the background of one recording, buried under the hum and the natural forest sounds, was a voice. Faint and distorted, like it was being played backward through water, but definitely a voice. And it was speaking English. I isolated the section and played it again, slower this time, adjusting the filters to clarify the audio. The voice was clearer now, though still obviously wrong in some fundamental way, and the words it was speaking made my hands go numb. "Don't follow it," my voice whispered with urgency and fear. But I'd been alone when I made that recording. I'd hiked out to the GPS dead zone by myself on a Tuesday afternoon, set up my equipment and recorded for 30 minutes before packing up and leaving. I hadn't spoken once during the entire session. I was certain of it. But there it was, embedded in the recording. My own voice warning me not to follow something. I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the waveform on my screen, trying to rationalize what I was hearing. Maybe it was interference from another frequency. Maybe someone had been hiking nearby and I hadn't noticed them. Maybe the equipment had malfunctioned and picked up something from earlier in the day, but I didn't believe any of those explanations. I went to bed that night with every light in my house on and my baseball bat leaning against the nightstand. Sleep came slowly and fitfully, broken by dreams of overlapping circles and pulsing lights, and that smooth, featureless head tilting to study me from between the trees. I woke suddenly at 3:17 in the morning. The room was dark. I was certain I'd left the bedside lamp on, but it was off now. My bedroom door, which I'd closed and locked, stood open. Cold air flowed in from the hallway, carrying with it the scent of pine and frost, and outside my window, painting my backyard in brilliant white light, something was pulsing. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at me to close my eyes, pull the covers over my head, and pretend I was dreaming. But I couldn't stop myself. I turned my head toward the window. The light was there, hanging maybe 10 feet off the ground above my back lawn, pulsing with that same gentle rhythmic expansion and contraction I'd seen in the forest, bright then dim, bright then dim. The rhythm matched my heartbeat exactly, or maybe my heartbeat had synced to the rhythm. I couldn't tell which. I wanted to run. I wanted to grab my phone and call the police and scream for help. but I found myself standing up instead, walking toward the window, pressing my hands against the cold glass. The light pulsed brighter in response, and beneath it, at the edge where my lawn met the darkness beyond, I saw the silhouette, tall and thin and wrong, standing perfectly still, that smooth head turned toward my window. We stayed like that for a count of 10. Then the light snapped off, plunging the backyard into darkness so complete I couldn't see anything at all. When my eyes adjusted, both the light and the figure were gone. I checked every door and window in my house, all locked. I sat in my living room with the lights on and my bat in my lap until the sun came up. Then I made a decision. I was going back to mile marker 7. Not during the day, not with equipment and cameras and the safety of sunlight. I was going at night. I was going alone. And I was going to find answers, whatever that meant. I know how this sounds. I know it seems reckless, stupid, suicidal even. But I'd spent weeks barely sleeping, jumping at shadows, hearing that hum in every quiet moment. Whatever was happening to me, whatever had happened to Marcus Webb and Jennifer Acosta and the others, I needed to understand it. I needed to confront it. Or maybe I just needed it to be over. I waited until the next Tuesday, the night I'd normally be driving home from my shift. I called in sick to work. I didn't want anyone wondering why my truck was parked on Highway 43 if something went wrong. I packed a backpack with basic supplies, a flashlight with fresh batteries and a notebook where I'd written down everything I'd learned. If I didn't come back, maybe someone would find it and understand. I drove out to mile marker 7 just after midnight. The road was empty, just like it had been that first night. I parked on the shoulder in almost the exact spot where Marcus Webb's car had been. The night was cold and clear, stars brilliant overhead, the temperature already dropping below freezing. I sat in my truck for a few minutes, engine running, heat on, trying to work up the courage to step outside. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from the cold. It was fear, pure and simple, the kind that starts in your stomach and radiates outward until even your fingers feel it. I thought about Marcus Webb, about what his last moments might have been like. Did he see the light? Did he encounter the figure in the trees? Did he make the choice to follow, or was the choice made for him? I turned off the engine and stepped out into the night. The silence was immediate and total. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing but the soft crunch of gravel under my boots. I left my truck unlocked with the keys on the driver's seat. If someone found it tomorrow, I wanted them to know I'd left willingly, that I'd made this choice. I turned on my flashlight and walked toward the tree line. The forest was exactly as I remembered it, dense and dark and heavy with that strange quality that made sound feel muffled. The temperature dropped as soon as I stepped between the trees. Static electricity raised the hair on my arms. I walked deeper, following no particular path, letting some instinct I didn't understand guide me. 20 yards in, 30, 50. My flashlight beam swept back and forth, catching nothing but trees and shadows. Then I saw it, the pulsing light deep in the forest ahead of me. Bright, then dim. Bright, then dim. The hum started simultaneously, that low vibration I could feel in my chest and bones. And beneath it, that clicking sound, rapid and irregular. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. I stopped walking. This was it. The moment of decision. I could turn around, run back to my truck, drive away, and spend the rest of my life wondering. Or I could keep going. I could walk toward that light and find out what waited for me in the dark. I took a step forward. The light pulsed brighter. Another step. The hum grew louder. Another. The clicking became a roar. The forest opened into a small clearing I didn't remember seeing before. The pulsing light hung in the centre, maybe 8 feet off the ground, brilliant and cold. And beneath it, standing in a loose semicircle, like they'd been waiting, were the figures. Not one, 5 of them. Tall and thin and wrong, their wet-looking skin reflecting the pulsing light in strange directions. No faces, just smooth curves where features should be. They stood motionless, watching me, with whatever senses beings like that possess. I should have run. Every primitive survival instinct demanded it, but I was so tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of not understanding. Tired of questions without answers. I opened my mouth to speak, though I had no idea what I would say. The light went from pulsing to solid, brilliant white that washed out everything else. The hum became a sensation rather than a sound, vibrating through reality itself, and the figures moved. Not toward me, around me, circling slowly, their movements synchronized like dancers who'd rehearsed this pattern 1,000 times. I felt it then, not in my body but in my mind, a presence pressing against my thoughts, not forceful or violent, but simply there, waiting. And with it came understanding. It wasn't trying to hurt me, it was asking me to follow. I don't know how long I stood in that clearing. Time felt broken, stretched and compressed simultaneously. But at some point I realised I was holding my notebook, pen in hand, writing by the light of that brilliant glow, writing words I didn't consciously think, recording something that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. When I stopped writing, the light began to fade. The figures stepped back, creating space, and I understood that the choice was still mine. I could walk back to my truck. I could drive home. I could pretend this never happened and spend the rest of my life as I had before. Or I could follow. I looked down at what I'd written in my notebook. The words were in my handwriting, but felt like someone else's thoughts. They explained things I hadn't known I wanted to understand. About the nature of reality and consciousness. About the thin places where different kinds of existence overlap. About beings who don't travel through space, so much as step between the folds of it. The last line I'd written, the one I didn't remember writing at all, said, "It wasn't trying to hurt me. It was asking me to follow." I tore the page from my notebook and walked back through the forest to my truck. My hands were steady now. The fear had transformed into something else. Not courage exactly, but acceptance. I placed the page on the hood of my truck, weighing it down with a rock so it wouldn't blow away. Then I walked back toward the tree line without looking back. The light was still there, pulsing gently, waiting. The figures stood motionless in their semicircle, and beyond them, barely visible in the wash of that brilliant glow, I could see others. Dozens of them, maybe more. I took one last look at the stars overhead, at the familiar constellations I'd known all my life. Then I stepped forward into the light. The last thing I remember thinking was that it didn't hurt. The transition, the crossing, whatever it was. It felt like stepping from a dark room into sunlight, or waking from a dream into something more vivid than dreaming. Then I was somewhere else. Epilogue. The following article appeared in the Boulder County Daily Times on December 3rd, 2011. Local man reported missing. Boulder County Sheriff's deputies are investigating the disappearance of a 34-year-old man who failed to report for his shift at a natural gas monitoring station early Tuesday morning. The man, whose name is being withheld pending notification of family, was last seen leaving his residence Monday evening. His vehicle was discovered Wednesday morning on Highway 43 near mile marker 7. The car was found with the driver's door open and the engine off. The man's keys were located on the driver's seat and a handwritten note was found on the hood. Sheriff's deputies report no signs of foul play. Search and rescue teams conducted an extensive search of the surrounding forest, but found no trace of the missing man. This marks the 5th unexplained disappearance on this stretch of highway in the past 22 months. Authorities continue to investigate potential connections between the cases. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Boulder County Sheriff's Department. The article didn't mention that multiple witnesses reported seeing a bright, pulsing light in the forest near mile marker 7 the night of the man's disappearance. It didn't mention that his watch was found in the front seat of his truck, stopped at exactly 3:17 in the morning. And it didn't mention what was written on the note found on his hood, though the investigating officers photographed it and filed it as evidence. The note is still in the case file, marked as unexplained. Sometimes, late at night, officers going through cold cases pull it out and read it, wondering what it means, wondering if they should be afraid, or wondering if they should follow. The forest near mile marker 7 continues to draw hikers and curiosity seekers. Most find nothing unusual, but every few months, someone reports seeing a pulsing white light deep in the trees. They report hearing a low hum that vibrates through everything. They report feeling watched by something without eyes. And very occasionally, someone drives past mile marker 7 late at night and sees a car pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking, driver's door hanging open. When they stop to help, they find the vehicle empty, keys in the ignition, engine warm, no sign of the driver, no footprints in the dust, just that distant hum calling from the darkness, and the choice, always the choice, of whether to follow. There exists a window of time that almost no one observes, not because it's hidden, but because observation requires consciousness, and consciousness requires witnesses. Between 3 and 5 in the morning, cities don't sleep so much as they idle. Traffic lights cycle through their patterns for empty intersections. Security cameras record hallways no one walks. Computer systems run diagnostics that no one monitors in real time. This is when I saw it. Or rather, this is when I noticed something that suggested I had been seeing it all along. My name is Marcus Webb, and for the past 11 years I've worked as a systems coordinator for the Regional Water Treatment Authority. It's not glamorous work. Most people don't think about where their water comes from, or how it's managed, until something goes catastrophically wrong. My job is to make sure nothing goes catastrophically wrong. I monitor flow rates, chemical balances, pressure differentials across a network of pumping stations, and treatment facilities that serve about 200,000 people. I work the overnight shift, midnight to 8 in the morning, 4 days a week. The pay differential makes it worth the circadian disruption, and honestly, I prefer it. No meetings, no supervisors hovering, just me, 6 monitors, and the quiet hum of systems doing exactly what they're designed to do. The event I'm about to describe didn't announce itself. There were no lights in the sky, no mysterious figures, no equipment failures or power surges. What happened was far more subtle, and in retrospect, far more unsettling. It started with a number that was technically correct, but contextually impossible. Chapter 1. The Anomaly on a Familiar Screen. It was a Tuesday morning in late September. The timestamp read 3:17. I had been monitoring a routine chlorination cycle at Treatment Plant 7, one of our smaller facilities located about 15 miles outside the city proper. The process is automated, but we maintain human oversight because water treatment operates on the principle that redundancy saves lives. The chlorine injection rate was reading 0.72 parts per million, well within acceptable parameters. The flow rate through the contact chamber showed 2.4 million gallons per day. Normal for that time of night. The residual chlorine reading at the discharge point measured 0.68 parts per million. I had been staring at these numbers for maybe 20 seconds before I realised what was wrong. The contact time didn't match. In water treatment, contact time is the duration that water spends in contact with chlorine before it's considered disinfected. It's a function of volume and flow rate. Given the size of Plant 7's contact chamber and the flow rate being reported, the contact time should have been roughly 90 minutes. The system was reporting 93 minutes. 3 minutes isn't much. It wouldn't trigger any alarms. The system builds intolerances for exactly these kinds of minor variations. Equipment drifts, calibrations shift. Real-world physics rarely aligns perfectly with theoretical calculations. But I had been doing this job for 11 years. I knew Plant 7 systems intimately. A 3-minute drift didn't happen gradually. It happened when something in the flow dynamics changed. I checked the influent delta, no variation. I checked the chamber level sensors, stable. I pulled up the historical logs and scrolled back through the past 6 hours. The drift had appeared suddenly at 2:41 in the morning, 36 minutes ago. The contact time had been 90 minutes at 2:40. At 2:41, it jumped to 93 minutes, and it had stayed there. I ran a diagnostic on the flow meters. They came back clean. I checked for air pockets in the contact chamber that might create dead zones. Nothing. I reviewed the chemical feed logs to see if someone had adjusted injection rates, without logging it properly. All normal. The numbers made sense individually. They just didn't make sense together. I logged the discrepancy as a minor anomaly and flagged it for the day shift to investigate. Probably a sensor issue. Probably nothing. Then I noticed something else. The moment I flagged the issue and looked away from that screen to check another facility, the contact time corrected itself. When I looked back, it read 90 minutes again. Exactly 90 minutes. I stared at the screen for a full minute. The reading held stable. 90.0 minutes. Not 90.1. Not 89.9. Exactly 90. I unflagged my report and deleted the notation. I told myself I had misread it the first time. Fatigue, too much coffee, not enough sleep before the shift. But I didn't believe that. I have a near photographic memory for numbers. It's why I'm good at this job. I opened a blank document and typed Plant 7 contact time anomaly 2:41 to 3:17. 93 minutes reported, then corrected to 90 on observation. I saved it to my personal drive, not the system logs. I didn't know why. It just felt like the right thing to do. The rest of the shift passed without incident. I didn't mention it to the day crew during shift change. What would I even say? I saw a number that changed when I stopped looking at it. They'd think I was losing it. I drove home as the sun came up, went to bed, and slept poorly. Chapter 2. Corroboration without communication. 3 nights later, I was back on shift. Different day of the week, same time window. I had almost convinced myself the contact time thing had been exactly what I'd told myself it was: misread data, tired eyes, coincidental timing. Then the temperature readings started drifting. Plant 7 again. This time, it was the raw water intake temperature. Our sensors monitor the temperature of incoming water because it affects chemical, dosing rates, and biological activity. The intake pulls from a reservoir that maintains fairly stable temperatures, especially at depth. At 2:39 in the morning, the intake temperature read 54.2 degrees Fahrenheit, standard for that time of year. At 2:43 it read 54.7. At 2:47 it was at 55.1, a 9/10 degree rise in 8 minutes. That doesn't happen. Water temperature changes slowly. Even if there were a thermal layer mixing event in the reservoir, we'd see gradual fluctuation, not a steady linear increase. I checked the outflow temperature from the treatment process. It had risen proportionally. I checked the ambient air temperature at the facility. It had actually dropped slightly. I checked weather data for the area. Clear skies, no wind, no atmospheric anomalies. The temperature continued to climb. 55.3, 55.6, 55.8. I was reaching for the phone to call the facility maintenance line when the increase stopped. The reading held at 56.0 degrees. Then over the next 12 minutes, it dropped back to 54.2, exactly where it had started. The rise had been 0.1 degrees per minute. The decline was 0.15 degrees per minute, almost like something was testing the system's response time, or measuring its thermal characteristics. I documented it. Personal file again. Same instinct as before. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I called Raymond Torres. Raymond works the same shift I do, but he monitors electrical grid distribution for the Regional Power Authority. Different agency, different systems, but we occasionally overlap on infrastructure coordination. We'd grabbed coffee a few times. He was solid, rational, not prone to jumping to conclusions. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I just asked him a hypothetical. Ray, if you saw system behavior that was technically within parameters, but contextually weird, would you report it? There was a long pause. Then, what kind of weird? The kind where nothing is actually wrong, but the numbers don't tell the story they should. Another pause. You seeing something? Maybe. You? He was quiet for maybe 15 seconds. Then, yeah, Tuesday night. Voltage phase imbalances on a distribution substation. Not enough to trigger alerts, but enough to notice. Came and went over about 40 minutes. I checked everything. Equipment's fine. Load patterns were normal. It just happened. What time, I asked? Started around 2:30, resolved by 3:20. My stomach tightened. Which substation? Station 44. Serves the industrial corridor and the East County area. Plant 7 was in the East County area. Did you report it? I asked. I logged it. Got a response saying they'd review it. Haven't heard anything since. When did you log it? Wednesday morning. You? Same. We were both quiet. Then Raymond said, Marcus, what's going on? I don't know, but I think something is paying attention to infrastructure. Paying attention how? That's what I'm trying to figure out. We agreed to keep each other informed if we saw anything else. The conversation ended there. Neither of us wanted to say what we were both thinking. The rest of my shift was quiet. I kept watching Plant 7's data streams, but everything behaved normally. At some point around 5 in the morning, I realised I was hoping for another anomaly. Just to confirm, I wasn't imagining patterns where none existed. Nothing happened. I went home feeling more unsettled than I had after the first incident. Chapter 3. The object that isn't an object. The third occurrence was different. This time I saw something, or rather, I saw the absence of something. It was early October, about 2 weeks after my conversation with Raymond, I had started arriving at work 30 minutes early and staying 30 minutes late, expanding my observation window. I told myself it was due diligence. Really, I was looking for it, whatever it was. At 2:53 in the morning, I stepped outside for air. The operations centre where I work sits on the edge of an industrial park, surrounded by warehouses and light manufacturing facilities. At night, the area is essentially deserted. A few security lights, the occasional truck passing on the frontage road. Nothing else. The sky was clear, new moon, the kind of darkness you don't get in cities. I was looking up, not for any particular reason, just appreciating the stars, when I noticed something odd about the light patterns. There's a cell tower about a quarter mile to the northeast. Red aircraft warning lights blink at the top. I've seen those lights thousands of times. I could time my coffee breaks by their rhythm, but that night the blinks were wrong. Not in timing, they still flashed at the regulation interval. But twice, maybe 3 times, the light appeared to blink behind something. Not a cloud. The sky was clear, not a bird. The interruption was too geometric, too consistent. Something was between me and that tower. Something that didn't reflect light. Something that had depth and dimension, but no visible surface. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes watching. The interruption happened again. The red light blinked, and for just a fraction of a second it was occluded. Not dimmed, not scattered, blocked. I went back inside and pulled up our site's external security camera feed. We have 4 cameras with overlapping fields of view, covering the parking area and building perimeter. I rewound to the time I'd been standing outside. The footage showed me clearly, standing there, looking up, but it showed nothing else. No object, no shadow, no anomaly in the frame. I switched to the infrared mode we use for overnight monitoring. Still nothing. But when I looked at the timestamp, metadata, something caught my attention. The camera had logged 3 brief buffering events during the time I was outside, each lasting less than a second. Not enough to disrupt recording, but enough to appear in the diagnostic log. I checked the network traffic analysis. During those buffering moments, data transmission from that camera had spiked, not by much, just enough to suggest the processor was working harder than usual to encode the video stream, as if it was trying to render something it couldn't quite process. I filed that in my personal documentation as well. Growing larger now. Screenshots, log exports, timestamps. I was building a case file without knowing what the case was. Chapter 4. The pattern. Over the next month, I documented 17 separate incidents. Not all at Plant 7. Not all involving the same type of system anomaly, but all sharing certain characteristics. They occurred between 2:30 and 3:45 in the morning. They lasted between 20 and 55 minutes. They involved measurements that were technically accurate, but contextually improbable. They resolved themselves without intervention. They left no permanent evidence in official logs. I created a spreadsheet. Date, time, duration, system affected, type of anomaly, correlation factors. I'm not a data scientist, but I know enough about pattern recognition to see what was emerging. Whatever this was, it operated on a schedule, not a regular schedule. The incidents didn't happen every night or even every week, but when they did happen, they clustered around specific times. Tuesday and Thursday nights were most common. Weekend incidents were rare, but not unheard of. I cross-referenced this against shift schedules, maintenance logs, and operational patterns. Tuesday and Thursday nights were when we ran reduced staffing. Fewer people monitoring systems, more automation, longer gaps between human observation. It was choosing when to appear, based on when it was least likely to be noticed. But it wasn't trying to hide. If it wanted to avoid detection completely, it could have. Our systems aren't monitored with perfect vigilance. There are gaps, blind spots, times when no one is watching at all. Instead, it was operating in a margin, present enough to be detectable if someone was paying attention, quiet enough to be dismissed as instrumental error if they weren't. That suggested something I didn't want to consider. It wanted to be found, but only by someone who was looking carefully. Raymond had continued reporting his observations. Voltage anomalies, frequency drift, momentary load imbalances, always in the same time window, always resolving without cause. He told me his reports were being acknowledged, but never investigated. The responses were polite and professional. "Thank you for your diligence. We'll monitor the situation." And then nothing. I asked him if he thought we were being ignored. "No," he said. "I think we're being managed." That was somehow worse than being ignored. Chapter 5. The Missed Report. In mid-November, I decided to file an official report, not through my normal supervisory chain, but through the infrastructure anomaly reporting system maintained by the State Utilities Commission. It's designed for exactly this kind of thing, unexplained system behaviour that doesn't rise to the level of emergency but warrants documentation. I spent 3 hours writing it. I included timestamps, system logs, correlation analysis, and cross-references to Raymond's electrical grid observations. I didn't speculate about causes. I just presented data. Factual, professional, verifiable. I submitted it on a Monday morning before I went to bed. By Wednesday night, when I came back on shift, I had a response. The email was cordial. It thanked me for my thoroughness. It acknowledged that I had identified some interesting correlations. It noted that periodic anomalies in automated systems are common and generally attributable to sensor drift, environmental factors, or timing coincidences in how multiple systems sample data. The report had been reviewed by appropriate technical staff. No safety issues were identified. No pattern of equipment failure was evident. The anomalies I documented fell within expected operational variance. The case was closed. No follow-up questions, no request for additional data, no interest in the correlation with electrical grid observations. Just noted, reviewed, closed. I read that email 4 times. Then I called Raymond. "Did you file a formal report?" I asked. "Last week." "You?" "Yeah, got a response today." "Let me guess. Thank you for your diligence, case closed?" "Pretty much." "Same here." He paused. "Marcus, I've been thinking about this. Maybe we're making something out of nothing. These systems are complex. Coincidences happen." "You don't believe that?" "No," he admitted. "But I don't know what I do believe. And I'm starting to think maybe that's intentional." "What do you mean?" "I mean, whoever reviewed our reports knew exactly what we were seeing. And they closed the cases anyway. Not because they think we're wrong, but because they think we're right and they don't want it investigated." I didn't sleep well that day. Chapter 6. The Near Encounter. December brought early snow. Not much, just enough to make the roads inconvenient and give me an excuse to leave for work even earlier than I'd been doing. I told myself it was about avoiding traffic. Really, I was still looking. On a Thursday night, 3 days before Christmas, I got closer than I ever wanted to. We'd had a minor equipment issue at Plant 7. A backup generator had failed its automated test cycle, which meant someone needed to physically inspect it to determine if it was a genuine fault or a sensor error. Normally, we'd wait for day shift maintenance, but the forecast called for heavy snow overnight, and protocol required backup power systems to be verified operational before severe weather. I volunteered to drive out there. It's only 15 miles. I had the access codes. I'd done field inspections before. I left the operations centre at 2:23 in the morning. The drive was uneventful. Roads were clear, no other vehicles. The snow hadn't started yet, but I could smell it in the air. That particular metallic crispness that comes before a storm. I reached Plant 7 at 2:41. The facility was quiet. Security lights illuminated the main treatment buildings. Everything looked normal. I parked near the generator building, grabbed my inspection tablet and flashlight, and headed inside. The generator checked out fine. The sensor had failed, not the equipment. I documented it, reset the test cycle, and confirmed it passed. Total time inside, maybe 12 minutes. When I came back outside, something was wrong. Not obviously wrong, not dramatically. Wrong. Just wrong. The air felt thick, not humid, not cold, just resistant. Like moving through something slightly denser than air should be. The sound was off too. I could hear the hum of the facility equipment, but it seemed muted, distant. Like I was hearing it through a wall. I looked up. The sky was overcast now, clouds having moved in while I was inside. But the light was strange. The security lights created halos that extended farther than they should. The shadows were too sharp. Then I noticed my truck. It was exactly where I'd parked it, but it looked farther away. Not much, maybe 10 or 15 feet, except I knew I'd parked it 30 feet from the generator building entrance. I always park in the same spot. I walked toward it. Each step felt normal, but when I reached the truck, I turned back toward the building. The distance looked right now. 30 feet, like it should be. My depth perception wasn't working correctly. I got in the truck and started the engine. The dashboard clock read 2:58. I had been inside for 12 minutes. It was now 34 minutes since I'd left the operations centre. That left 10 minutes unaccounted for. 10 minutes of drive time on a 15-mile route that should take 18 minutes. I sat there trying to make sense of it. Had I driven faster than I realised? Had I lost time inside the building? Was the clock wrong? Then I looked at my phone. It agreed with the truck's clock. 2:58. I checked my inspection tablet. The timestamp on my generator report showed I'd entered the building at 2:43 and completed the inspection at 2:55. That was 12 minutes, but I'd arrived at 2:41. 2 minutes were missing between when I parked and when I entered the building. I tried to remember those 2 minutes. I remembered parking. I remembered getting my equipment. I remembered walking to the door. But there was a gap, a smoothness in the memory, like a transition seen in a movie where time passes, but nothing happens. I drove back to the operations centre. The route took exactly 18 minutes. Nothing unusual happened. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I'd almost convinced myself I'd just lost track of time. Simple explanation, human error. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been somewhere else for those 2 minutes. Somewhere that wasn't quite aligned with normal space. Chapter 7. After Effects. No missing time after that. No injuries, no dramatic physical evidence. But things were different. Small things, subtle things. My sense of timing became imprecise. I've always been able to estimate elapsed time accurately. It's a useful skill for my job. But after that night at Plant 7, my internal clock was consistently off. I'd think 5 minutes had passed and it would be 7. I'd estimate 15 minutes and it would be 12. I started having trouble with spatial relationships, not dramatically. I could still drive, still function normally, but occasionally a doorway would seem narrower than I remembered, or a hallway would feel longer. The distortions were brief, momentary, but persistent. I also developed an acute awareness of being watched. Not by people, not by cameras, just watched. The feeling would come on suddenly, usually during the quiet hours at work. I'd be monitoring systems, and the back of my neck would prickle. I'd turn around, nothing there, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I mentioned this to Raymond during one of our coffee meetings. He looked uncomfortable. "Yeah," he said, "I've been feeling that too, like something's paying attention." "Since when?" "About a month, since I filed that report." We didn't talk about it much after that. What could we say? We were both rational people who worked with empirical systems. We dealt in measurements and verifiable data. Feelings of being watched didn't fit into that framework, but the feeling persisted. I also started noticing patterns in my peripheral vision, quick movements that resolved into nothing when I looked directly, shadows that didn't align with light sources, brief distortions in reflective surfaces. None of it was dramatic enough to document. None of it was clear enough to verify. It existed in that margin between perception and imagination. The most disturbing change was the dreams. I don't normally remember my dreams, but starting in January, I began having the same dream repeatedly. I was standing in the parking lot at Plant 7 looking up. The sky was full of stars, but they were wrong, moving in patterns that stars don't move, and I was aware that something enormous was overhead. Not threatening, just present, observing. In the dream, I always felt calm, curious, like I was being shown something important that I couldn't quite understand. I'd wake up with no anxiety, no fear, just a profound sense of having missed something obvious. Chapter 8. Independent Confirmation. In late February, I found the forum. I wasn't looking for it. I was researching infrastructure monitoring protocols for work and stumbled across a discussion thread on an engineering message board. The topic was about unexplained sensor anomalies in automated systems. Most of the posts were routine troubleshooting, but one thread caught my attention. Someone with the username GridWatch had posted a detailed description of voltage anomalies they'd observed over several months. The pattern was identical to what Raymond had documented. I created an account and messaged them privately. I didn't give details, just asked if they'd noticed any temporal patterns. They responded within an hour. Tuesday and Thursday nights, 2:30 to 4, you too? We ended up talking for 3 hours. GridWatch was a power systems engineer in Oregon, 600 miles from where I was. Different grid, different utility authority, but the same pattern, same time window, same unexplained resolution. Over the next week, I found 4 more people: a wastewater treatment operator in Nevada, a telecom systems analyst in Colorado, a meteorologist in Idaho who'd noticed atmospheric measurement anomalies, an air traffic controller in Montana who tracked brief radar artifacts. All of them had seen something. All of them had reported it through official channels. All of them had been told essentially the same thing. Interesting observations, no safety concern, case closed. None of them knew each other. None of them had connected their observations to anything larger. Until now. We created a private group. We started sharing data, and the pattern became undeniable. Across 5 states, over 18 months, at least 27 people had documented the same phenomenon. System anomalies that were technically valid, but contextually impossible. Always during low observation hours, always resolving without intervention, always occurring in proximity to critical infrastructure. The most chilling discovery was the geographic pattern. When we plotted the incidents on a map, they formed a rough grid, not random, not clustered in one area, distributed across the western United States in a way that suggested methodical coverage. Something was surveying infrastructure, systematically, comprehensively, and it had been doing so for at least a year and a half, probably longer. We just hadn't noticed until we compared notes. Chapter 9. The theory that explains too much. In March, I developed a working hypothesis. I didn't share it with the group immediately. I wanted to test it against the data first. The hypothesis went like this. What we were observing wasn't visiting Earth, it wasn't arriving or departing. It was already here, had been here, would continue to be here. It existed in the margins of human observation, not hiding, not avoiding detection, simply operating in the spaces between our attention. It interacted with systems, not people. It measured, it tested, it observed, but it didn't interfere beyond what was necessary to gather data. The contact was non-invasive, almost respectful. It triggered anomalies only when they wouldn't cause harm. It resolved them before human operators needed to act. It avoided patterns that would force official acknowledgement. This suggested several disturbing possibilities. First, it understood human systems well enough to know how they were monitored. Second, it had access to operational schedules and staffing patterns. Third, it could predict when anomalies would be dismissed versus investigated. Fourth, it had been doing this long enough to refine its approach. The most unsettling implication was this. The phenomenon wasn't studying our infrastructure to understand our technology. It was studying our infrastructure to understand us, how we organize, how we coordinate, how we respond to anomalies, how we filter information, how we decide what to investigate and what to ignore. It was learning the patterns of human collective behavior by watching how we managed our shared resources. When I finally shared this hypothesis with the group, the response was mixed. Some thought I was over-interpreting. Some thought I wasn't going far enough. But no one could offer a better explanation that fit all the data. The air traffic controller, whose username was Skywatch, raised a question that stuck with me. If it's been here all along, and it's this good at staying in the margins, how many of them are there? And what happens when they're done studying? No one had an answer. Chapter 10. Why it never became a story. You'd think something like this would make headlines. 27 witnesses, documented evidence, multiple jurisdictions, a pattern spanning multiple states. But it didn't. Here's why. No single incident was dramatic. Each anomaly, taken individually, was easily explained. Sensor drift, calibration error, environmental factors, human fatigue. No evidence survived rigorous scrutiny. We had logs and timestamps and correlation analyses, but we didn't have physical proof. No photographs, no video, no material samples. Nothing that couldn't be dismissed as instrumental artifact. No authority denied it strongly enough to raise questions. Our reports were acknowledged, they were reviewed, they were filed. The response was professional, thorough, and completely non-committal. There was nothing to push against, no cover-up to expose, just polite bureaucratic processing. The story died because it was too quiet to fear. It didn't fit the narrative of how contact should happen. No invasion, no communication, no revelation. Just data that didn't quite add up in ways that most people would never notice. I tried talking to a journalist once, met them at a coffee shop, showed them the spreadsheet, the timeline, the geographic distribution. They were interested for about 10 minutes. Then they asked the question that killed it. What do you want people to do with this information? I didn't have an answer because there was nothing to do, no threat to prepare for, no action to take, no demand to make. It was just information about something that was happening, and that wasn't enough. The journalist thanked me for my time and never followed up. Our private group continued documenting incidents. We compared notes, we refined our data, but we stopped trying to convince anyone else. What was the point? We'd learned what we needed to learn. We were being studied, carefully, patiently, by something that had no interest in being known. And the world continued exactly as it had before. Epilogue. Still there. It's late April now. I'm writing this during my shift. 3:32 in the morning. The quiet hours. Plant 7 is running normally. All systems within parameters. Nothing unusual in the logs. But I'm watching, and I know it's there. Not tonight maybe, but soon, Tuesday or Thursday, between 2:30 and 4, something will drift. Some measurement will be technically correct, but contextually impossible. And I'll document it, add it to the file, send it to the group, and nothing will change. The phenomenon is still operating, still measuring, still learning. The incidents haven't stopped. They've just become part of the background, part of what infrastructure does in the hours when no one is watching. I don't know what it wants. I don't know what it's building toward. Maybe nothing. Maybe it's purely observational. Maybe we're as interesting to it as soil bacteria are to us. Present, measurable, ultimately not concerning. Or maybe it's waiting, gathering enough data to understand us completely. Learning our patterns so thoroughly that when it does make itself known, we won't even realize it's happening. The water still flows, the power still runs, the systems still hum along exactly as they're designed to, and somewhere in the margins, in the spaces between human attention, something watches. It's not hiding, it's just patient, and I suspect it's been here much longer than we think. The quiet hours are when the world runs on automation, when cities idle instead of sleep, when critical systems operate without human oversight. It's the perfect time for observation. And I think it knows we know it's there. It just doesn't care if we believe it. Because belief isn't required for observation to continue. The numbers tell their story. The patterns persist. The evidence accumulates in private files and abandoned reports. And in the quiet hours, when the world stops watching, we are being watched in return. I don't know how this ends. I don't know if it ends. I just know that whatever is out there operates on timescales we can't imagine. And what seems like an 18-month study to us might be the briefest glance to them. A moment of curiosity, a passing interest, a casual survey of infrastructure managed by creatures who still measure time in years instead of eons. We build systems to last decades. It thinks in millennia, and will never be able to prove it was here, because it leaves no evidence that can't be explained away, no proof that survives the filter of official skepticism, no story dramatic enough to overcome the human preference for comfort over truth. So it remains what it has always been, an anomaly, a curiosity, a pattern that technically shouldn't exist but can always be dismissed. And in the quiet hours I watch my screens, and I know I'm not the only one watching. The question isn't whether it's real. The question is what happens when it finishes collecting data, and whether we'll even notice when it does. My shift ends in 4 hours. The sun will rise, the day crew will arrive, systems will continue their routines, and tonight, during the hours nobody watches, it will be back, measuring, testing, observing, still there, always. There, in the quiet hours, where nobody looks,